Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the grit and glory of being a gladiator in ancient Rome. Not the Hollywood version, you know, but a world where the clash of swords meant survival and the roar of the crowd was your heartbeat. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. The morning light creeps into the ludus, and you, a gladiator in ancient Rome, are met with the familiar scent of sweat, metal, and anticipation. It's the kind of odor that could wake you faster than a rooster's crow. You rise from your straw mattress, feeling the ache in your muscles, the constant reminder of yesterday's training. But hey, you're not here for comfort. You're here to become a spectacle. Welcome to the world where flesh meets fortune. As you shuffle out of bed, you're part of a well-oiled machine, the ludus, or gladiator school, humming with activity. This is your home, your battlefield, and your marketplace all rolled into one. Here, you're not just a man, you're an investment. Your worth is calculated in denarii and sesterces, your value determined by the sweat on your brow and the sharpness of your sword. It's a brutal economy, but it's yours to navigate. Breakfast is barley and beans, your fuel for the day. Forget those lavish Roman feasts you've heard about. Your diet is more like a Spartan's dream. High in carbohydrates, low in glamour. The barley helps bulk you up, giving you that solid, bear-like physique the crowd loves. You're not just eating for survival, you're eating to be a towering spectacle. And trust me, the crowd doesn't want to see a lean, mean fighting machine. No, they want to see a giant clashing with other giants. The day's training starts early, and it's as rigorous as ever. Your trainer, or Lannister, is already barking orders. He's the guy who makes sure you're not just strong, but strategically lethal. You're drilled in everything from sword fighting to hand-to-hand combat, and each session feels like a mini skirmish in itself. The goal, to ensure you don't end up as just another casualty on the sand. You're not just learning to fight. You're learning to survive. Now, let's talk economics because, in case you didn't notice, gladiators are big business. The cost of your gear could rival that of a small villa. Your armor, crafted with precision, isn't just for protection, it's part of your brand. Every dent and scar on it tells a story, much like your own. The shield, the helmet, the greaves, each piece is custom-fit and costly. We're talking a price tag that could easily hit 3,000 sesterces. That's more than most folks make in a year. Your owner, or editor, has invested a small fortune in you, and you're expected to pay dividends in the arena. Your value isn't just muscle-bound, it's economic. You're part of a market where the supply and demand of life and death play out in sand and blood. The more victories you notch on your belt, the higher your worth. But don't get too comfortable. The moment your sword falters or your reflexes slow, the market can turn against you faster than you can say, Ave Caesar. It's a precarious balance, and you're always just one misstep away from obsolescence, or worse. So why does any of this matter? Because in the gritty world of Roman entertainment, you're not just a pawn, you're a prized piece on a very public chess board. The Romans have a taste for the dramatic, a thirst for spectacle, and your survival depends on feeding that appetite. But let's not romanticize it too much. The life of a gladiator is as much about grit as it is about glory. It's a constant reminder that beneath the pomp and ceremony lies the stark reality of life on the edge. As you train, the sun climbs higher, casting long shadows across the training grounds. You feel the weight of your sword, the bite of the leather straps of your armor, and the eyes of your fellow gladiators sizing you up. Each one of you is a potential rival, a competitor in this deadly game. But there's a camaraderie too, a shared understanding of the stakes. You're all part of this strange fraternity, bound by the same fates and fortunes. Throughout the day, you push through the drills, the sparring, the relentless pursuit of perfection. Your body is a weapon, your mind a fortress. And while the world outside the ludus spins on with its politics and power plays, in here, it's all about survival and spectacle. You fight not just for the roar of the crowd, but for the chance at freedom, the hope that one day you might earn your wooden sword. A symbol of manumission, your ticket out of this brutal business. As the day winds down, you feel the fatigue setting in, the kind of bone-deep weariness that only a day of combat training can bring. But there's satisfaction too, a sense of purpose. You know that every bead of sweat, every bruise, is a step toward mastery. You're not just a gladiator, you're a warrior, an athlete, a performer. And as the sun sets over the horizon, you find a strange comfort in the routine, a rhythm in the chaos. Your value, your very existence, is tied to the whims of a crowd, the calculations of an editor, and the economic forces that see you as both man and commodity. It's a harsh reality, but it's your reality. And as you lay down on your straw mattress once more, you know that tomorrow will bring another day of blood, sweat, and the chance to etch your name into the annals of history. In the end, it's not just about surviving. It's about leaving a legacy, however fleeting it might be. And so, as you drift to sleep, the cheers of the arena echo faintly in your dreams, blending with the murmurs of the ludus. Come midday, you'll find yourself pondering your odd place in the social hierarchy of ancient Rome. It's a bizarre balancing act, teetering between the adulation of a rock star and the disdain of a used chariot salesman. You, a gladiator, are both hero and outcast, a celebrated spectacle and a scorned slave. How's that for a paradox? Let's talk about the glamour, or rather, the lack of it. Sure, when you step into the amphitheater, the crowd roars, and for a fleeting moment, you're the center of the universe. Senators and commoners alike cheer your every move, their eyes glued to the sand where you risk life and limb. But don't let that fool you. Outside the arena, things are a bit different. The elite might applaud your martial prowess, but invite you over for a lavish dinner party. Not a chance. You're more likely to get a nod of acknowledgement in the street than a seat at a nobleman's table. Why the cold shoulder? Well, Roman society is a stickler for status and propriety. At the top of the social ladder, you've got your senators and equestrians, folks who wouldn't be caught dead associating with those who spill blood for a living, unless it's from a safe distance, of course. Gladiators, despite their fame, are technically slaves or at best, freedmen. This puts you in a social limbo that even the most agile fighter would struggle to navigate. It's like being a viral sensation, but still crashing on your buddy's couch. Despite this, your allure is undeniable. The Romans, ever the fans of contradiction, find themselves drawn to the very thing they claim to disdain. Gladiators are the bad boys of the ancient world, dangerous, exotic, and tantalizingly untouchable. The same senators who wouldn't dream of inviting you to dinner might pay handsomely for a private match in their villa, or even a few tips on swordplay. You're the guilty pleasure of the Roman elite, a living, breathing embodiment of their own suppressed desires for violence and virtue. And then there's the economic angle. Fans love you, sure, but it's the coin you generate that truly speaks volumes. Some gladiators, especially those who survive long enough to rack up a string of victories, can earn substantial sums, upwards of 15,000 sesterces per fight for the top performers. That's more than a legionary's annual salary. But don't let those numbers go to your head. Remember, you're just one unlucky stroke away from being yesterday's news. The arena is less about building a legacy and more about surviving the next round. Life expectancy. Well, let's just say it's not exactly promising. The average gladiator's career spans about 3 to 5 years if they're lucky. Every time you step onto the sand, you're reminded that glory is fleeting and mortality is ever present. Rome's fascination with death is a double-edged sword, and you're dancing on the razor's edge. The crowd loves a good fight, but what they truly crave is the ultimate sacrifice. It's a morbid fascination, and you're both its star and its victim. Even if you do manage to defy the odds and survive, don't start planning your retirement in the Tuscan countryside just yet. Fame doesn't buy you a cushy retirement plan. Many retired gladiators find themselves struggling to make ends meet, their bodies battered, and their skills no longer marketable. Without the roar of the crowd, the world can be a lonely place, and old injuries make for poor companions. Some might find work as trainers or bodyguards, but the transition from the arena to the real world is anything but smooth. You're left grappling with a new kind of battle, life itself. And then there's the elusive reward of freedom. Some gladiators, those who capture the public's heart or their editor's favor, are granted the wooden sword, or rudies, signifying their release from the life of combat. It's the ultimate symbol of manumission, a tangible acknowledgement of your prowess and perseverance. But don't think it comes easy. Earning your rudies requires more than just skill. It demands resilience, charisma, and a certain knack for surviving against the odds. It's the Roman dream, breaking free from the chains of servitude and stepping into the light of liberty. Yet, even with the promise of freedom, the reality remains stark. You've spent years perfecting the art of combat, and now, at the threshold of liberty, you must reinvent yourself. It's a daunting prospect, one that requires a different kind of bravery. The world beyond the arena is as unpredictable as the games themselves, and navigating it requires a different set of skills, ones that aren't taught in the ludus. The sun now hangs high in the sky, casting its harsh light over the city, illuminating the grandeur and the grit in equal measure. As you take a moment to catch your breath, you're reminded that every scar, every victory, and every defeat is part of a larger tapestry. The life of a gladiator is not just a tale of violence and valor. It's a reflection of Roman society itself, with all its contradictions and complexities. You are a mirror to their ambitions and anxieties, a living testament to the thrill of the spectacle and the inevitability of death. In the end, your story is one of survival, of navigating the perilous path between fame and obscurity, between life and death. It's a constant reminder that while the crowd may applaud your prowess, it's the quiet moments that define your legacy. And as you prepare for another day in the arena, you know that your greatest battle is both ahead and within you, challenging you to rise above the sand and the spectacle, to etch your name into the annals of history, one fight at a time. And so, as you prepare for another day in the arena, you know that your greatest battle is both ahead and within you, challenging you to rise above the sand and the spectacle, to etch your name into the annals of history, one fight at a time. Now let's dive headfirst into that afternoon sun, when the real show begins. First, let's talk about the Colosseum. The architectural marvel that's as synonymous with Rome as pizza is with Italy. This isn't just any old amphitheater. It's the granddaddy of all stadiums, seating an impressive 50,000 spectators. That's right, a crowd size that can match some of today's biggest sports arenas, and we're talking about an era without jumbotrons or overpriced hot dogs. Built between 70 and 80 AD, this stone and concrete behemoth is where the magic, or, depending on your perspective, the madness, happens. You see, the Colosseum isn't just a place, it's a statement. It stands as a testament to Roman engineering, sure, but more importantly, it's a tool of political theatre. The games are not merely about blood and guts. They're about power, control, and the delicate art of keeping the masses entertained, and more crucially, distracted. It's the ancient equivalent of binge-watching a reality show. Lots of drama, a touch of scandal, and just enough excitement to keep the populace from questioning why the empire is hemorrhaging money like a bad gambler on payday. Speaking of money, let's not forget the economic machinery behind these spectacles. The cost of staging the games could easily bankrupt a small province, and yet emperors shelled out the denarii like they were going out of style. Why? Because in the complex calculus of Roman politics, a happy populace equals a stable regime. Bread and circuses, my friend, give the people what they want, and they're less likely to start sharpening their pitchforks. It's a strategy as old as politics itself, proving that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Now, picture the scene as you, the gladiator, step into this cauldron of humanity. The noise is deafening, a wall of sound that hits you like a physical force. The crowd, a mix of senators, merchants, and commoners, are here for a show, and they're not going to settle for a lackluster performance. The emperor himself, perched in the best seat in the house, is watching with a keen eye, his thumb ready to deliver a verdict that could change your life in an instant. Talk about pressure. But here's the kicker. While the crowd may be here for the thrill, the Emperor is playing a different game entirely. For him, the games are a chance to flex his political muscles, to remind everyone just who's in charge. It's a masterclass in optics, a way to project power while also indulging in a bit of personal entertainment. And let's face it, who doesn't love a good show when you're the one pulling the strings? The logistics of these events are mind-boggling. We're talking about a full day's program, starting with exotic animal hunts in the morning, followed by public executions. Because nothing says, don't commit crimes, like watching someone meet an untimely demise. And then, the main event, the gladiatorial combats. It's a meticulously planned affair, with every detail designed to maximize drama and spectacle. The Romans knew how to put on a show, and they weren't afraid to go big or go home. But let's not ignore the darker side of this spectacle. While the games are a feast for the senses, they're also a grim reminder of the fragility of life and the whims of fate. Every time you step into the arena, you're gambling with your future, and the odds are rarely in your favor. It's a brutal existence, one that underscores the harsh reality of a society that prizes entertainment over empathy. The blood-soaked sand is a sobering testament to the lengths people will go to in the name of spectacle. And yet, for all its brutality, there's an undeniable allure to the arena. The roar of the crowd, the adrenaline of the fight, the tantalizing possibility of glory. It's a heady mix that's hard to resist. The games offer a fleeting moment of immortality, a chance to transcend the mundane and touch the divine. It's the ultimate high-risk, high-reward scenario, and for a gladiator, it's the only game in town. As the afternoon wears on, the temperature rises, both literally and metaphorically. The crowd is a living organism, its mood shifting and swaying with the ebb and flow of the combat. They cheer, they boo, they hold their breaths in unison as the drama unfolds before them. It's a visceral experience, one that blurs the line between reality and theater. In this arena, every moment is charged with potential, every movement steeped in significance. Now, let's talk myth-busting. The modern image of the gladiator, all bulging muscles and heroic poses, is both a romanticized and sanitized version of the truth. Yes, there were moments of glory, but they were often overshadowed by the harsh realities of life and death in the arena. The notion of the noble gladiator, fighting for honor and fame, is a compelling narrative, but it's one that overlooks the exploitation and the violence that lay at the heart of the spectacle. The games may have been about entertainment on the surface, but underneath they were deeply political. The Colosseum was a microcosm of Roman society, a place where the complexities of power, class, and culture played out in vivid technicolor. For the emperors, the games were a way to reinforce Roman values of strength and dominance, a reminder of the empire's might and the futility of resistance. In the end, the Colosseum was more than just a stage. It was a crucible, a place where the best and worst of humanity were put on display for all to see. It was a testament to the power of spectacle, a reminder that while the games may have been about life and death, they were also about something much larger, the eternal struggle for power and control, both in the arena and beyond. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the arena, you find yourself reflecting on your place in this grand performance. You, the gladiator, are both a participant and a pawn in a much larger game. It's a sobering thought, but it's also a reminder of the indomitable spirit that drives you forward, even in the face of overwhelming odds. For in this world of sand and blood, it's not just about surviving. It's about carving out a legacy, one fight at a time. And as the day draws to a close, you prepare to face whatever challenges tomorrow may bring, armed with the knowledge that every battle is a chance to prove your worth, to defy fate, and to leave your mark on the world. In the Colosseum, the stakes are as high as the walls that surround you, and the only certainty is that the games will go on, as relentless and unforgiving as the empire itself. As you prepare for another night of gladiatorial combat, the air thickens with anticipation. a tangible tension that clings to your skin like the dust of the arena. The Colosseum transforms into a cauldron of expectations, its stone walls echoing the murmurs of a restless crowd eager for spectacle. It's a setting where reality and myth collide, where the romanticized heroics of Hollywood meet the gritty truth of survival tactics honed over years of brutal training. Let's start by tearing down some of those cinematic myths that have seeped into our collective imagination. Picture the typical Hollywood gladiator: chiseled abs, a perpetually windswept mane, and a stoic resolve that would make even a Roman senator swoon. Now toss that image out the window, because the real deal was far less glamorous. Gladiators were often battle-worn, scarred, and painfully aware that their next fight could very well be their last. Forget slow motion, charging into battle. Each movement was calculated, deliberate, a dance with death that required precision, not just bravado. Surviving in the arena wasn't about sheer strength or fearlessness, but rather about strategy, agility, and adaptability. You see, each gladiator had a specific fighting style, often dictated by the type of armor and weaponry they were given. From the heavily armored Murmillo to the nimble Retiarius armed with a net and trident, each role required different skills and tactics. The Murmillo, resembling a walking tank with his large shield and gladius, relied on brute force and defense, while the Retiarius counted on speed and reach to outmaneuver opponents. The stakes were high, and the margin for error was razor-thin. You couldn't just bash your way to victory. You had to outthink and outlast your adversaries. And about those referees. Yes, the gladiatorial games had referees, known as summer Rudies, who played a crucial role in maintaining order in the chaos. They weren't there to ensure fair play out of a sense of sportsmanship, though. Their presence was more about preserving the investment. A dead gladiator was a wasted asset, and the people footing the bill, the editors, wanted a good return on their blood-soaked investment. So referees stepped in to separate fighters when things got too heated, or if one gladiator was at risk of being dispatched too quickly. They were a curious blend of judge, mediator, and let's be honest, a bit of a killjoy, ensuring that the drama unfolded at just the right pace. But here's the real mind-bender. For all the death and destruction, the vast majority of gladiatorial fights didn't end in death. Modern estimates suggest that only about 10–20% of fights were fatal. That's a far cry from the all-or-nothing, fight-to-the-death scenarios that fill our screens today. Why? Because gladiators were valuable assets, not expendable extras. Their lives and deaths were carefully calculated decisions, with economics often tipping the scales more than bloodlust. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the gladiator's ability to read a room. The crowd's favor wasn't just a nice-to-have, it was a potential lifesaver. Gladiators were performers as much as they were fighters, and winning over the audience could mean the difference between a thumb turned up or down. A well-timed flourish, a dramatic pause, or even a glance to the emperor's box could sway the masses in your favor. It was survival of the most charismatic. Of course, survival also meant understanding the power dynamics at play. The games were more than mere entertainment. They were a reflection of Rome's social hierarchy and political machinations. Gladiators were the pawns in this grand chess game, their fates intertwined with the whims of emperors and the fickleness of public opinion. The spectacle served as a brutal reminder of Rome's might, a tangible display of the power structures that held the empire together. Yet, the allure of the arena was undeniable. The thrill of combat, the roar of the crowd, the tantalizing chance at glory. It was a heady mix that kept gladiators coming back for more, despite the overwhelming odds. It was a high-stakes game, where the potential for fame and fortune was matched only by the risk of a swift and violent end. As the evening drapes its shadow over the Colosseum, you ready yourself for the battle ahead. The crowd's roar becomes a living thing, pulsating with a life of its own as you step onto the sand, each footfall a reminder of the razor's edge you walk. In this arena, every fight is a chance to etch your name into history, to defy the odds and claim your place among the legends of Rome. The games are a microcosm of the empire itself, a testament to the complexities of power, control, and survival. As you stand at the cusp of combat, You are both a participant and a witness to the spectacle, a living embodiment of Rome's enduring legacy and its insatiable hunger for drama. Here, under the watchful eyes of thousands, you confront not just your opponent, but the very essence of what it means to be a gladiator, warrior, performer, survivor. And so, as the evening settles in, casting long shadows across the arena floor, you steel yourself for the fight. The crowd waits, the emperor watches, and fate holds its breath. In this moment, you are not just a gladiator. You are a testament to the enduring dance of life and death, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the human spirit is a force to be reckoned with. As the final light of day fades, you step forward, ready to face whatever the night may bring, armed with the knowledge that every fight is a testament to your will, your strength, and your indomitable spirit. As you step onto the arena's sand, the echoes of the crowd's anticipation still ringing in your ears, you can't help but ponder what comes next after the adrenaline fades and the dust settles. The games are over, the spectators have dispersed, and the Colosseum, that grand theatre of triumph and tragedy, stands silent once more. But for you and every gladiator who faced the roar of the crowd, the real journey begins after the final bow. Let's talk about the aftermath of the games, a mixed bag of fortune, fame, and sometimes an unceremonious end. If you're lucky enough to walk out of the arena, you face a future as unpredictable as the games themselves. For some, victory in the arena is a ticket to freedom. The coveted rudies, a simple wooden sword, signifies your manumission. It's the Roman equivalent of a golden parachute, but instead of retiring to a villa, you're stepping out into a world that's as daunting as the arena. And what about those who reach the pinnacle of fame? The lucky few who become household names, like the legendary Flamma or the undefeated Spartacus, could find themselves enjoying a celebrity status that, while not quite Kardashian level, was certainly enviable in ancient terms. These gladiators might enjoy the perks of fame, lavish gifts, adoring fans, and invitations to the homes of the elite, albeit through the servant's entrance. But don't get too comfortable. Fame in Rome is as fickle as a summer breeze. One misstep, one defeat, and you could find yourself forgotten faster than yesterday's gladiatorial gossip. Sadly, not every gladiator story ends in glory or freedom. For many, the sands of the arena are their final resting place. The grim reality is that the average life expectancy for a gladiator wasn't much to boast about. Many ended up in unmarked grave, their stories untold, their sacrifices unremembered. It's a harsh reminder that beneath the glamour of the games, there lies a sobering truth. For every champion, there are countless who fall forgotten. But let's not get too morose. There's a certain resilience in the gladiatorial spirit that's hard to ignore. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, the human capacity for hope and survival shines through. It's a testament to the indomitable spirit that drove these warriors to step into the arena day after day, armed with nothing but their skills and the hope of seeing another sunrise. Now, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. The legacy of gladiators is a fascinating study in contrasts. On one hand, they were the embodiment of Roman ideals, courage, strength, and the relentless pursuit of honor. On the other, they were a stark reminder of the empire's darker side, a culture that glorified violence and used spectacle as a tool for control. The games were a microcosm of Roman society, reflecting both its grandeur and its brutality. In today's world, the idea of gladiatorial combat seems as archaic as dial-up internet. Yet, the fascination with these ancient warriors endures. They captivate our imagination, inspiring countless movies, books, and even video games. Why? Because they represent something timeless. The struggle for survival, the quest for glory, and the eternal dance with death. They remind us of our own humanity, of the thin line between civilization and chaos. But here's the kicker. While we romanticize the gladiator's life, it's crucial to remember the stark realities they faced. The arena was more than just a stage for heroics. It was a brutal business, where lives were commodities and death was a constant companion. The allure of the arena lies in its contradictions. a place where the nobility of the human spirit clashed with the harsh truths of mortality. As we wrap up this journey through the life of a gladiator, let's acknowledge what their existence tells us about human nature. The gladiators, with their blend of heroism and hardship, mirror our own struggles and triumphs. They remind us of the eternal desire to leave a mark on the world, to rise above the mundane and touch the extraordinary, even if just for a fleeting moment. So, as you drift off to sleep with visions of sand and steel, remember that beneath the roar of the crowd and the gleam of the armor lies a tale as old as time, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who dared to face the impossible and live to tell the tale. In the end, the legacy of the gladiators is not just about the battles they fought, but about the timeless truths they reveal about courage, resilience, and the unyielding quest for meaning in a world ever teetering on the edge of chaos. In the grand tapestry of history, few threads are more colourful or tangled than that of Elizabeth Tudor, the future Elizabeth I, born on September 7, 1533, in Greenwich, England. The infant Elizabeth had more drama awaiting her than any reality TV star could dream up. Her father, King Henry VII, was desperately hoping for a male heir, and Elizabeth's arrival was, well, a bit of a letdown. Still, the scene was set for a life that would be as tumultuous as it was legendary, and Elizabeth's childhood was no fairy tale, unless we're talking about the kind where the evil stepmother is actually your stepmother and she's plotting against you. Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn, captured Henry's heart after he ditched his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, in a move that might have made even a soap opera writer blush. Henry broke with the Catholic Church just to marry Anne, and all he got was another daughter. Oops, Anne's fall from grace was swifter than a Tudor horse race. In May 1536, when Elizabeth was barely 3 years old, Anne was executed on charges of adultery, incest, and treason, none of which were probably true. But hey, when Henry wanted someone out of the picture, he didn't mess around. This grim episode left Elizabeth without a mother and with a rather awkward family reputation. Elizabeth's early years were marked by a precarious dance through the treacherous Tudor court. Her status fluctuated more than the stock market, as she went from princess to lady overnight, courtesy of her father's whims and marriages. Enter Jane Seymour, wife number 3, who finally gave Henry the son he craved, Edward VI. Elizabeth's relationship with her half-brother Edward was amicable enough, but she had to learn to navigate the shifting sands of her father's favour, something that would serve her well in future political machinations. Her education was no ordinary affair. Under the guidance of tutors like Roger Ascham, Elizabeth became a polyglot and a prodigy. By the time she was a teenager, she could speak fluently in multiple languages, including Latin, Greek, French, and Italian. One might say she was the original polyglot influencer. Her intellect was sharp enough to cut through the layers of court intrigue that surrounded her. And let's not forget her relationship with her half-sister Mary, the future Mary I, better known as Bloody Mary. The two sisters had a relationship that could be best described as complicated. Mary, a staunch Catholic, had been declared illegitimate just like Elizabeth, but her restoration to the line of succession under the Third Succession Act of 1543 meant that she was back in the game. Elizabeth learned early that in the Tudor court, keeping your head, literally and figuratively, required a deft touch. The political climate was a minefield. England was swinging between Catholicism and Protestantism faster than Henry could find a new wife. In this religious tug-of-war, Elizabeth had to master the delicate art of diplomacy. She learned to keep her personal beliefs close to her chest while publicly adhering to whatever religion was in vogue at the time. Her survival instinct was honed to perfection, a necessary skill when your family tree resembled more of a battlefield than a garden. Elizabeth's formative years were a masterclass in resilience. She faced accusations of treason, was imprisoned in the Tower of London, and survived the volatile reign of her sister Mary. It was a time of royal squabbles where your worst enemy could share your last name, and the stakes were literally life and death. If you thought family dinners were awkward, try sitting across from someone who might order your execution. As Elizabeth emerged into adulthood, she carried the scars and lessons of her youth with her. The Tudor court was a dangerous place, but it was also the perfect training ground for a future queen. Her early education, her navigations through familial tensions, and her ability to read people and situations with a hawk's eye. These were the tools Elizabeth sharpened in her youth. And these tools would become her greatest assets as she stepped onto the stage of history not as a pawn, but as a queen who would defy expectations and carve her own path. As Elizabeth stepped into the role she was seemingly born for, the crown of England was anything but a shiny jewel. It was more like a rusty old helmet with a few dents, namely, a whopping £300,000 debt, which in today's terms would be like inheriting a mountain of student loans with zero job prospects beyond. Royal figurehead. Elizabeth was inaugurated into her reign on November 17, 1558, and she might as well have been handed a sinking ship along with the scepter. The nation was financially pinched, politically precarious, and religiously riven. It was a less than stellar welcome, but hey, if anyone could turn this mess into a functioning monarchy, it was Elizabeth. England's finances were in such disarray that even a Tudor-era economist would have thrown up their hands in despair. The crown's coffers were emptier than a church during a plague, thanks largely to the costly military campaigns of her predecessors. Particularly those under Mary I. Elizabeth didn't have the luxury of a blank checkbook. She had to be more frugal than a bargain shopper on Black Friday. The Queen's economic policy, dubbed the Elizabethan economy, was less about lavish spending and more about cutting costs and managing resources wisely. She had to stretch the royal purse strings tighter than a corset on a feast day. Elizabeth's solution was both simple and revolutionary. Restore the value of the English currency by reminting the coinage. The state of the currency was, to put it mildly, a disaster. Inflation was skyrocketing, and the silver content in coins had been so debased they might as well have been chocolate coins wrapped in foil. In 1560, she ordered a recoinage to stabilize the economy, which helped regain public trust and boost trade. It was a bold move that showed her knack for practical solutions, proof that sometimes the best way to fix a problem is to start with the basics. Now, when it comes to Elizabeth's personal expenses, she was the queen of frugality. Forget the image of a queen dripping in jewels and silks. Elizabeth was more likely to be found wearing the same dress multiple times, a scandalous move in courtly circles where wearing the same outfit twice was akin to social suicide. Her wardrobe, though undoubtedly regal, was famously limited. A small royal wardrobe meant fewer expenses, and while it might sound like penny-pinching, it was a smart way to keep the focus on governance rather than glitter. Besides, Elizabeth understood the power of image. She knew that her carefully curated appearance was more than just about clothes. It was about projecting stability and control. While Elizabeth was busy balancing the books and cutting costs in her personal life, she also had to navigate the tricky waters of politics. One of the biggest myths surrounding Elizabeth is the idea of the Virgin Queen. The narrative of her remaining chaste for the sake of the kingdom is about as plausible as a fairy tale romance. The truth is that her unmarried status was more a political strategy than a personal choice. Remaining single allowed her to use marriage as a bargaining chip with foreign powers without getting tied down, literally and politically. It was a masterstroke of political cunning, allowing her to play potential suitors from France, Spain, and elsewhere like a game of royal chess. Her image as the Virgin Queen was carefully cultivated to strengthen her position. In an age where female rulers were seen as weak and ineffective, Elizabeth needed to project an image of purity and strength. The Virgin branding was less about her personal life and more about creating an aura of mystical, almost divine, authority. It was a savvy move that elevated her above the male-dominated political fray and reinforced her status as an untouchable sovereign. Elizabeth's early reign was a period of careful maneuvering and strategic decision-making. She inherited a kingdom in turmoil, but refused to let it dictate her legacy. Instead, she turned challenges into opportunities, using her intellect and wit to weave a tapestry of resilience and innovation. She might have started her reign with a crown that was more trouble than treasure, but through shrewd governance and well-calculated political gambits, she laid the foundation for what would become one of the most celebrated reigns in English history. But don't be fooled into thinking it was all smooth sailing from here. The seas of Elizabeth's England were still choppy, with religious tensions simmering beneath the surface and rivals lurking in every shadow. Yet Elizabeth's early decisions set the stage for a reign defined by clever diplomacy and cultural flowering. As we move forward, we'll see how this remarkable woman navigated the treacherous waters of 16th century politics, not just surviving but thriving in a world that was often less than kind to ambitious women. Stay tuned. There's more to come in the saga of England's most enigmatic queen. Elizabeth's reign, already a tightrope walk between genius and chaos, took an electrifying turn with the Spanish Armada in 1588, a showdown that could have knocked England off the map. Picture this: Philip II of Spain, the brooding monarch with a penchant for grand gestures, decided it was time to teach Elizabeth a lesson for her Protestant ways, and those cheeky English pirates nipping at his galleons like Jack Russell Terriers. His plan: send a fleet so massive it would make Poseidon do a double-take. Now, you'd think a naval engagement of this magnitude would be backed by a naval budget as vast as the Armada itself. But in true Elizabethan style, the English Navy was more of a shoestring operation. Imagine running a marathon with your shoelaces tied together, and you've got the right idea. With funds tighter than a miser's purse, Elizabeth's navy depended on privateers, basically legalized pirates, to bolster their ranks. Enter Sir Francis Drake, the Elizabethan-era rock star known for his daring raids and a beard that could scare off entire fleets. Drake was the kind of guy who'd turn up late to his own battle, but still managed to steal the show. As the Armada approached, the English Navy faced a morale crisis to match. Years of underfunding had left sailors unpaid and ships in disrepair. The English vessels, though nimble, were outgunned and outnumbered by the Spanish behemoths. It was like sending a pack of scrappy terriers against a herd of armored elephants. But here's where the plot thickens. The weather decided to play an unexpected supporting role. A series of storms battered the Spanish fleet, scattering their ships like leaves in a tempest. This meteorological intervention, dubbed the Protestant wind, became the divine sidekick of Elizabeth's forces. Amidst this maritime drama, Elizabeth delivered her famous Tilbury speech, a pep talk that was part Shakespearean soliloquy, part royal PR stunt. Clad in armor and astride a horse, she proclaimed, "I know I have the body of a weak, feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." It was the kind of declaration that could rally even the most seasick sailor. The speech wasn't just a morale booster, it was a masterclass in image crafting. Elizabeth knew that in the male-dominated world of 16th century politics, projecting strength was as vital as wielding it. The battle itself was a chaotic dance of strategy and luck. The English used fire ships, vessels set ablaze, and sent drifting into the Spanish formation to scatter their enemies. It was the naval equivalent of setting off fireworks at a rival's garden party. And while the Spanish had numbers, the English had speed and cunning. Their smaller, more maneuverable ships could dart in and out, delivering blows before the lumbering Spanish could respond. When the dust, or rather the sea spray, settled, the once mighty Armada limped back to Spain, battered and broken. Of the 130 ships that set out, fewer than half returned. The defeat was colossal, not just in military terms, but in its ripple effects across Europe. England's victory over the Spanish Armada marked a turning point in national identity. It was the underdog story that turned a beleaguered island nation into a burgeoning maritime power. The English fleet might have been cobbled together like a patchwork quilt, but their triumph was the stuff of legend. For Elizabeth, the victory was a PR goldmine. The Armada's defeat bolstered her image as an invincible ruler. The Virgin Queen myth gained new layers as she was seen as the divinely favored protector of her people. It was as if the sea itself had chosen her to lead England into a new era. This wasn't just a win for England. It was a personal triumph for Elizabeth, who had faced down one of the greatest military powers of her time with nothing more than grit, guile, and a little help from the weather. But let's not get too carried away with the romanticism of it all. The harsh reality was that England's victory didn't magically solve its problems. The economy was still a patchwork of debts and deficits, and the threat from Spain hadn't vanished entirely. Yet the Armada's defeat marked a significant shift in Europe's balance of power. It was a chapter in Elizabeth's reign that showcased her political acumen, turning adversity into a narrative of resilience and divine favor. As we move forward, remember that the story of Elizabeth I is as much about the woman as it is about the Queen. Her legacy was built not just on battles won, but on the clever manipulation of image and power. So stay tuned, because the saga of Elizabeth's reign is far from over, and there's plenty more intrigue, scandal, and sheer tenacity to come. With the Spanish Armada saga wrapped up in a bow of triumph and a sprinkling of divine favor, Elizabeth I turned her gaze toward something a bit less drenched in gunpowder and sea spray. The arts. Welcome to the Elizabethan Golden Age, where England wasn't just a player on the political stage, but was also setting the cultural world ablaze, thanks to a queen who knew that sometimes the pen, or in this case, the quill, really was mightier than the sword. Elizabeth's reign saw the flourishing of English arts like never before. Think of it as the Renaissance with a Tudor twist, a cultural explosion where theatre became the Netflix of the day, and playwrights were the influencers everyone wanted to follow. At the heart of this creative maelstrom was none other than William Shakespeare, a man whose literary prowess was as legendary as Elizabeth's political savvy. While it's tempting to imagine Shakespeare and Elizabeth having tea and discussing iambic pentameter, the reality is that they probably never met. Yet Elizabeth's patronage of the arts created an environment where a young bard could thrive. The theatre scene in London was booming, with the Globe Theatre opening its doors in 1599. This was more than just a wooden O. It was a cultural hub where the magic of storytelling came to life under the open sky. Built by the Lord Chamberlain's men, the company that Shakespeare was a part of, the Globe became a symbol of this vibrant artistic era. Seating up to 3,000 spectators, it was a place where the lines between class blurred. Peasants jostled with nobles for a glimpse of the latest play, proving that drama was the great equalizer. But let's not romanticize this too much. The theatre wasn't all velvet seats and crystal chandeliers. Imagine a bustling, rowdy crowd, the groundlings, those who paid a penny to stand in the pit, boisterously interacting with the performance. It was less to be or not to be, and more to eat or not to eat, as vendors peddled ale and hazelnuts. And if the play wasn't to your liking, you could always express your discontent by hurling an apple at the stage. Critics today might wield pens, but Elizabethan audiences weren't afraid of a little produce-based feedback. While the arts flourished, let's not forget that Elizabethan society was a tapestry woven with threads of both splendor and squalor. The streets of London, though bustling with creativity, were also teeming with, well, everything else. Public hygiene was about as advanced as a medieval latrine. Streets doubled as sewers, and the air was thick with the stench of humanity, livestock, and the occasional overripe tomato left by an unimpressed theatre-goer. Amidst this sensory assault, the notorious Black Plague lurked, a grim reminder that life in Elizabethan England was a precarious dance with death. The plague visited like an unwelcome houseguest, regularly sweeping through cities and leaving devastation in its wake. In 1603, the plague claimed over 30,000 lives in London alone, about one-fifth of the city's population at the time. Theatres were often shuttered during outbreaks, putting a temporary damper on the cultural festivities, and reminding everyone that in the game of life and death, the stakes were incredibly high. Elizabeth's England was a world of contrasts, where the glitter of the arts shone against the gritty backdrop of urban life. The era's romanticized portrayals often gloss over this harsh reality, but it's precisely this duality that makes the period so fascinating. The same city that birthed Shakespeare's masterpieces was also a place where rat-catchers plied their trade, and residents relied on chamber pots more than sanitation systems. Yet it was in this environment that Elizabeth's patronage of the arts became a beacon of hope and creativity. By investing in cultural pursuits, she boosted national morale and fostered a sense of English identity that transcended the muck and mire of everyday life. The arts weren't just a distraction, they were a statement of resilience and ingenuity. Elizabeth, with her keen understanding of image and influence, recognized the power of the arts to bolster her reign. It wasn't just about entertainment. It was about crafting a narrative where England stood as a bastion of culture and intellect. Her support for the arts was as strategic as any military campaign, placing England firmly on the map as a cultural powerhouse. And while the myth of the Elizabethan Golden Age paints a picture of endless merriment and poetic brilliance, it's crucial to remember the reality beneath the gilded surface. This was an age of contrasts, where the joys of artistic expression coexisted with the grim realities of disease and poverty. Yet, it was precisely these challenges that fueled the creative fire, making the achievements of this era all the more remarkable. As we delve further into Elizabeth's legacy, it's essential to see both the legend and the reality. The golden age of English arts was no mere accident. It was the result of deliberate patronage, a burgeoning national identity, and a society that, despite its flaws, dared to dream and create. Elizabeth's reign was a masterclass in turning adversity into opportunity, and the cultural blossoming of her time is a testament to the enduring power of art to inspire and uplift, even in the darkest of times. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the tapestry of Elizabethan England, exploring the complex interplay of politics, culture, and society that defined an era and left an indelible mark on history. There's more intrigue, scandal, and brilliance ahead in the saga of England's most enigmatic queen. As the curtains drew on Elizabeth's golden era of arts and drama, the stage was set for the Queen's final act. But before we roll the credits, let's tackle the Elizabethan religious settlement, an issue that made Elizabeth's reign feel more like an extended episode of religious Survivor. When Elizabeth came to power in 1558, England's religious identity was like a seesaw in a windstorm, swinging wildly between Catholicism and Protestantism with each new monarch. Elizabeth, with her signature blend of pragmatism and panache, decided it was time to plant the flag of compromise squarely in the middle. Enter the Elizabethan religious settlement, a balancing act to rival any tightrope walker. The settlement, formalized in 1559, was Elizabeth's masterstroke of religious diplomacy. It re-established the Church of England's independence from Rome while maintaining some Catholic traditions to keep the peace. The Act of Supremacy confirmed Elizabeth as the supreme governor of the Church of England. Note, not head, because being a woman and all, she had to downplay it a notch. And the Act of Uniformity set the order of prayers to be used in the English Book of Common Prayer. It was the kind of compromise that left just about everyone slightly dissatisfied, which in politics often means it's working. This settlement was less about dogma and more about stability. Elizabeth knew that religious discord was a surefire way to plunge the kingdom into chaos, and she wasn't about to let the clergy write the script for her reign. The settlement allowed for a certain elasticity. Catholics could attend services without converting, and Protestants could keep their reforms. It was a bit like hosting a dinner party where no one particularly likes the menu, but everyone agrees to sit at the table for the sake of decorum. The long-term effects of this religious détente were significant. By threading this needle, Elizabeth not only averted immediate crisis, but also laid the groundwork for a more unified national identity. The settlement wasn't a magic potion that dissolved all tensions, far from it. There were plots, rebellions, and enough religious intrigue to fill a cathedral. But it provided a foundation upon which England could build, fostering a sense of continuity that would endure well beyond Elizabeth's rule. Fast forward to March 24, 1603, when the indomitable Queen finally laid down her crown and her life. Elizabeth died at Richmond Palace, aged 69, surrounded by the shadows of her extraordinary reign. Her passing marked the end of the Tudor dynasty, a family saga more turbulent than any soap opera. With no children to inherit her throne, thanks to her strategic singlehood, the crown passed to her cousin, James VI of Scotland, ushering in the Stuart era. The transition was smoother than one might expect, given the tumultuous Tudor backdrop. James I, son of Mary, Queen of Scots, was no stranger to the complexities of wearing a crown. His ascension united England and Scotland under a single monarch for the first time, a union that was more shotgun wedding than love match, but significant nonetheless. James's reign would bring its own set of challenges, but for now, let's keep our focus on Elizabeth's legacy. Elizabeth's death was the end of an era, but it was also the birth of a myth. The good Queen Bess persona, a nickname that sounds more like a pub than a monarch, was less a reflection of reality and more a carefully constructed narrative. In truth, Elizabeth was a complex figure, a savvy operator in a world where political missteps were often fatal. Her reign was no fairy tale. It was a gritty, relentless pursuit of stability and power in a realm where women were seldom seen as fit to rule. The Virgin Queen myth, perpetuated by portraits and propaganda, painted Elizabeth as a paragon of purity whose devotion was solely to her country. This image, while appealing, glossed over the gritty reality of her reign. Elizabeth wielded her single status like a rapier, using it to entangle and outmaneuver rival powers. It was a clever ruse, a marketing campaign centuries ahead of its time, designed to elevate her above the fray of male-dominated politics. Elizabeth's legacy is a testament to her political acumen and her ability to navigate the treacherous waters of 16th century geopolitics. Her reign saw the flowering of the English Renaissance, the defeat of the Spanish Armada, and the establishment of England as a major player on the world stage. But it was also marked by the harsh realities of religious conflict, economic hardship, and political intrigue. Ultimately, Elizabeth's story is one of transformation. She took the fractured, debt-ridden kingdom she inherited and turned it into a burgeoning empire. Her reign was defined by resilience and innovation, crafting a narrative of triumph amidst adversity. The myth of good Queen Bess endures, but beneath it lies the story of a monarch who was anything but one-dimensional, a woman whose legacy is as complex and enduring as the age she defined. As we close the book on Elizabeth I, remember her not just as a queen, but as a symbol of the power of adaptability and intelligence in the face of overwhelming odds. Her life was a masterclass in the art of ruling with wit and wisdom, and her legacy continues to resonate through the centuries. So, next time you hear tales of the Virgin Queen, look a little closer at the woman behind the myth, a ruler who, in her own words, had the heart and stomach of a king. In a world where the ultimate real estate flex was having a ziggurat bigger than your neighbors, Mesopotamia was the place to be. Picture vast floodplains. Sounds idyllic, right? Except here, floodplain was less about lush, fertile land and more about regular waterlogged chaos. Yet, in this soggy expanse, humanity decided to roll up its sleeves and lay the foundation for civilization. Sure, there were easier places to start a city, but who wants easy when you can have a story that begins with, and then the river washed everything away? The Sumerians, our ancient urban pioneers, picked the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers around 3100 BCE. Now, you'd think they'd be deterred by the annual deluge, but nope. They saw opportunity in adversity, or at least a place to practice their irrigation skills. And so, they built cities like Uruk and which sound more like grunts than the grand metropolises they were destined to become. Here's the thing about building in a floodplain. It's a bit like setting up camp in a kiddie pool and hoping it doesn't rain. But in true human fashion, they went ahead and did it anyway. The Sumerians developed a knack for urban planning that was equal parts genius and madness. They constructed elaborate canal systems to control the water, essentially rerouting nature itself. If that sounds like a Herculean task, it was. But if anyone could convince a river to behave, it was these folks. Early cities were mostly mud brick marvels. Think of these bricks as the duct tape of antiquity, Cheap, versatile, and they got the job done. The only problem, mud bricks don't exactly scream long-lasting. They're more like until the next big rain. Still, they were the cornerstone of Sumerian architecture, and with enough layers, you could build something that looked pretty impressive, until the inevitable happened and you had to start over. But let's talk bureaucracy. If you think modern governments are bogged down in red tape, you're not ready for ancient Mesopotamia. These early societies were surprisingly bureaucratic. The city of Uruk, for example, wasn't just a hub of trade and culture. It was a paperwork paradise. They had scribes churning out records on clay tablets faster than you can say cuneiform. And what were they documenting with such fervor? You guessed it, beer rations. Because if there's one thing that transcends time, it's humanity's love for a good brew. Beer wasn't just a beverage, it was practically currency. The Sumerians were the original brewmasters, perfecting the art of fermentation in a way that would make any craft beer enthusiast envious. The average worker received a daily beer ration, a perk that undoubtedly made hauling mud bricks a tad more bearable. The importance of beer extended beyond the tavern. It was central to religious ceremonies and even used as an offering to the gods. Imagine a deity rejecting your sacrifice because it was a pint short. Awkward. Now let's bust a myth or two. We often romanticize these early cities as utopias of knowledge and innovation. While they did achieve remarkable feats, life in Mesopotamia was far from idyllic. It was a world governed by harsh laws and rigid social hierarchies. The Code of Ur-Nammu, one of the earliest legal codes, laid down some no-nonsense rules. Steal a piece of property, that could cost you your life. And don't even think about false testimony unless you're keen on a swim in the river, a trial by water if you will. Despite the challenges, these early cities grew and flourished, driven by trade and innovation. They weren't just mud brick settlements. They were bustling hubs of commerce, with merchants trading everything from textiles to agricultural products. The Sumerians pioneered writing, mathematics, and even created the wheel, an invention that, quite literally, kept the world turning. In essence, Mesopotamia was a place of contradictions. Brilliant yet flawed, innovative yet bound by tradition. It was a society that thrived on the brink of disaster, with citizens who knew how to party like there was no tomorrow, because, quite often, there wasn't. In the grand tapestry of history, these early cities were the threads that connected us to the dawn of civilization, albeit with a few hiccups along the way. So there you have it. Mesopotamia, where the streets were paved with mud, the laws were as harsh as the sun, and the beer flowed as freely as the rivers that threatened to wash it all away. It's a wonder they didn't just pack up and move to higher ground. But then again, where's the fun in that? And speaking of not packing up and moving, let's glide down the Nile and take a peek at ancient Egypt, where the obsession with life after death was so intense, they built monuments to last for eternity, literally. Enter the pyramids, those iconic stone behemoths you could spot from a camel's mile away. These weren't just oversized tombstones. They were the ultimate, look what I did with my summer projects for the pharaohs. But let's be clear. The pyramids weren't erected by aliens, despite what certain late-night TV shows might suggest. Nope, these architectural wonders were the result of human ingenuity, sweat, and a dash of political spin that would make even the savviest modern PR team blush. Now, let's talk logistics, because building a pyramid was no weekend DIY project. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, originally stood at a towering 146. 6 meters, take that, modern skyscrapers. Constructed around 2580–2560 BCE, this limestone leviathan required about 2–3 million blocks, each weighing between 2.5 to 15 tons. That's the weight of a small herd of elephants for those keeping track. And let's not forget the precision. Each side of the base was 230, 4 meters long, with the 4 sides aligning almost perfectly with the cardinal points. It's enough to make a modern engineer weep into their blueprints. But who were the hands behind this Herculean effort? Contrary to the popular myth of slave labor, the workforce was primarily composed of skilled laborers and craftsmen. with some estimates suggesting a rotating crew of around 20,000 to 30,000 workers. These guys weren't just any laborers. They were well-fed, well-housed, and even had access to medical care. Think of it as an ancient workers' union, minus the dental plan. In fact, evidence from workers' villages near the pyramids suggests they had access to high-quality beef, fish, and bread. An enviable diet that would put many modern meal plans to shame. Now, let's consider the economic weight of these projects. Building a pyramid was the ancient equivalent of launching a nationwide infrastructure program. The costs weren't just in stone and grain, they extended to the entire economy. Resources had to be diverted from farming and trade, craftsmen had to be skilled up, and massive logistics systems had to be devised to haul those mammoth stones across the desert. But why go to all this trouble? Simple: immortality. For the pharaohs, these pyramids were gateways to the afterlife, eternal monuments that would ensure their names lived on forever. And let's be honest, immortality is a pretty sweet deal if you can get it. Of course, the pharaohs didn't just rely on bricks and mortar to secure their eternal legacy. They also employed some serious PR maneuvers. The construction of the pyramids was spun as a national duty, a sacred task that united the populace in a divine mission. It was less, build my tomb, and more, join the national project for glory and honor. It's a testament to the power of messaging that this was seen as a privilege rather than a chore. Imagine convincing thousands of people to spend years of their lives stacking stones under the blazing sun while selling it as a civic duty. That's some next-level spin right there. But let's not romanticize it too much. While the workers weren't slaves in the traditional sense, the labor was grueling, and the conditions could be harsh. Sunburns weren't the only occupational hazard. Injuries and accidents were common. Yet for many, the promise of a better life in the hereafter kept them going. And who could blame them? In a world where life was often nasty, brutish, and short, the idea of a guaranteed spot in the eternal afterlife was an appealing carrot at the end of a very long stick. And speaking of carrots, let's not ignore the financial carrot that was dangled in front of the nobility and overseers. The building of a pyramid was also a chance for upward mobility, a way to ingratiate oneself with the powerful. Those in charge of the labor could increase their standing and wealth, ensuring their own version of immortality through status and legacy. It's a tale as old as time. Where there's a will, there's a way to climb the social ladder, even if that ladder is made of stone blocks. So there you have it, a society that turned monument building into a national pastime, all in the name of eternity. While the pyramids stand as a testament to human ambition and architectural prowess, they're also a reminder of the lengths we'll go to in pursuit of legacy and meaning. And of course, they offer a glimpse into an economic system where the line between civic duty and sheer necessity was as blurred as the horizon on a hot Egyptian day. But don't worry, our journey down the Nile isn't over yet. We've still got tales of pharaohs, priests, and the peculiar economics of mummification to explore. So stay tuned, because when it comes to ancient Egypt, the sands are full of stories waiting to be uncovered. Speaking of sands full of stories, let's pack our philosophical bags and sail across the Mediterranean to Greece, where the city-states were as chaotic as a soap opera with a cast of thousands. Welcome to ancient Greece, where democracy got its messy start in Athens, and Spartans turned austerity into an art form. If you think modern political debates are heated, just wait until you hear about Athens and Sparta, the original frenemies. First stop, Athens, the poster child for democracy, where everyone was equal, except for women, slaves, and anyone without an Athenian birth certificate. That said, Athens was a place where citizens could vote on everything from war declarations to who made the best olive oil. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't democracy as we know it. In reality, it was more like an exclusive club with a strict dress code. Out of an estimated population of 250,000, only about 30,000 were actually eligible to vote. That's like having a concert where only the roadies get to pick the set list. Athens, penchant for war is a paradox wrapped in a toga. While they loved to talk about peace in their philosophical symposiums, they were quick to grab a spear at the slightest provocation. Take the Peloponnesian War, for example, which kicked off in 431 BCE and dragged on for nearly 3 decades. This was less about noble causes and more about power plays, with Athens eager to flex its naval muscles. The war was a costly affair, both in terms of human lives and economic resources. By the end, Athens was left battered, bruised, and in desperate need of a good therapist. But hey, at least they had those stunning marble statues, right? Ah, the glory of Greek sculpture. Except, spoiler alert, they weren't originally white. Most of these statues were painted in bright colors, turning them into the ancient equivalent of a Vegas show. The cost of these masterpieces was no small change, either. Crafting a statue could set you back as much as 1,000 drachmas, a princely sum considering the average worker might earn about 1 drachma a day. So next time you admire a Greek statue, remember, it's not just art, it's an ancient status symbol. Now, let's take a stroll over to Sparta, where the lifestyle has been romanticized more than a Hollywood meet-cute. Spartan life was about as fun as a boot camp with no end date. The city-state was an anomaly, opting for a militaristic society where boys started their rigorous training at age 7. Talk about childhood interrupted. The whole society was geared towards warfare, with the helots, essentially state-owned serfs, doing the heavy lifting of agriculture so the Spartans could focus on flexing their muscles. But don't be fooled by the glossy veneer of Spartan discipline. The reality was grimmer than a broken sandal on a rocky road. For all their military prowess, Spartans were notoriously bad at anything involving diplomacy or economics. Their iron currency, meant to deter theft and promote equality, was about as useful as a chocolate teapot in the grand scheme of trade. It's hard to negotiate with a pocketful of heavy, cumbersome iron bars when the rest of the world is jingling coins. While Sparta was busy perfecting its military machine, Athens was diving headfirst into intellectual debates that would make your high school philosophy teacher swoon. Picture this. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle engaged in what can only be described as the ancient world's version of Twitter spats, minus the character limit, but with just as much drama. These guys weren't just shooting the breeze. They were debating the very essence of existence, morality, and politics, often with a side of hemlock if you were Socrates. Philosophical schools popped up like trendy cafes, each with its own take on the meaning of life. But let's not gloss over the economic realities that fueled these intellectual pursuits. The wealth of Athens, driven by trade and the exploitation of silver mines at Laurium, allowed its citizens the luxury of pondering the cosmos. No silver, no symposiums. It's a hard truth that even the most profound thoughts often ride on the back of economic prosperity. So, there you have it, a tale of 2 city-states, each a paradox in its own right. Athens, the cradle of democracy, yet a warmonger at heart. Sparta, the model of discipline, yet economically inept. Both left legacies that echo through the ages, their stories a testament to the complexity of human societies. And while the romantic myths of democratic Athens and disciplined Sparta continue to captivate us, it's the gritty realities, the economic struggles, social hierarchies, and political machinations that offer the most compelling narratives. But don't get too comfortable. There's still plenty more to uncover in the ancient world. We've got philosophical musings to unpack, maritime empires to explore, and even more myths to bust as we continue our journey through the fascinating annals of history. So stay tuned, because the past has never been more present. Now, let's buckle up and head to the land of togas, triumphs, and occasionally total train wrecks, the Roman Empire. Ah, Rome, the city that wasn't built in a day, but sure knew how to throw a party. From Britain's chilly shores to Egypt's sun-baked deserts, the empire's grandeur was matched only by its sheer scale. But beneath the marble facade and legionary swagger lay an economic reality as precarious as a chariot race on a rainy day. First, the basics. At its peak around 117 CE, the Roman Empire sprawled across 5 million square kilometers, encompassing a patchwork of cultures, languages, and importantly, tax bases. You see, Rome wasn't just a collection of territories. It was an economic behemoth that relied on a vast network of trade routes, slave labor, and yes, some creative accounting. Maintaining this behemoth required serious cash flow, and the Romans were nothing if not resourceful. Taxes on land, goods, and even people were the empire's lifeblood. And when taxes fell short, well, there was always the option to conquer a neighbor and help oneself to their resources. Nothing like a little imperialism to balance the budget, right? Speaking of budgets, let's talk about Nero, Rome's fabulously unhinged emperor, who famously fiddled while Rome burned. Now, whether he actually played the lyre during the Great Fire of 64 CE is debatable, but what's undeniable is his penchant for fiscal madness. Nero's piece de resistance, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. Picture a palace lavish enough to make even the most extravagant billionaire blush. Estimates suggest it sprawled over 30 hectares, complete with a 35-meter-tall statue of Nero himself. Narcissistic much. The cost of this architectural ego trip was astronomical, funded by tax increases and confiscations that left the Roman economy reeling. And yet, in a twist worthy of a soap opera, the Domus Aurea never quite saw completion, thanks to Nero's eventual downfall. Talk about a house of cards. But let's not pin all of Rome's fiscal follies on poor Nero. The empire's economic model was a cocktail of brilliance and absurdity, with a dash of how the heck did that work thrown in for good measure. Take, for instance, the cost of the Roman legions. Maintaining an army capable of defending such a vast territory was no small feat. By the 2nd century CE, the Roman army boasted around 300,000 troops, each drawing a salary paid in denarii, Rome's hard currency. Soldiers also received land as a retirement bonus, which on paper sounds generous, but in practice often meant a plot in the middle of nowhere. It's like promising a beachfront property and delivering a desert shack. Rome's economy thrived on trade, and its network was as complex as a soap opera family tree. Goods flowed from the far reaches of the empire, with luxury items like silk and spices arriving via the Silk Road. But for every shipment of exotic goods, there was the ever-looming threat of pirates. Yes, the Mediterranean wasn't just a Roman lake, it was a maritime Wild West. The empire spent a fortune patrolling these waters, ensuring that the lifeblood of trade wasn't cut off by some seafaring scoundrels. You could say Rome had to shell out a pretty penny to keep the goodies flowing. Yet for all its prowess, the Roman economy was not invincible. Inflation was a familiar foe, particularly under emperors who decided that simply minting more coins was the answer to all financial woes. Spoiler alert, it was. The debasement of currency, reducing the silver content in coins, led to spiraling inflation, eroding the purchasing power of Roman citizens faster than you can say economic collapse. A denarius that once bought a week's worth of bread might barely cover a loaf within a generation. The Roman answer, more taxes, because if there's one thing everyone loves, it's paying more for less. Now, let's bust a myth or two. Rome's decline is often painted as a grand, dramatic fall, a tragic narrative of decadence and decay. But the reality, it was more like a slow, awkward stumble, peppered with economic mismanagement and political infighting. Sure, the Gothic invasions and military overreach didn't help, but let's not forget the homegrown issues. The empire's reliance on slave labor, while initially a boon, eventually stifled innovation. Why invest in new technology when you've got an endless supply of human hands? It was a short-sighted strategy with long-term consequences. In the grand scheme of things, the Roman Empire was a marvel of its time, a testament to human ambition and folly. Its roads connected distant lands, its laws laid the groundwork for future governance, and its cultural influence echoes through history. Yet behind the marble statues and imperial proclamations lay an economic reality as complex and flawed as any modern economy. The Romans might have been masters of the ancient world, but even they couldn't outrun the basic laws of economics. In the end, It was their own systems, the very foundations of their greatness, that sowed the seeds of their decline. But let's not end on a downer. Rome's legacy is one of resilience as much as it is of ruin. The echoes of its triumphs and trials continue to resonate, offering lessons in governance, economics, and the perennial human quest for power and glory. And while we've only scratched the surface of the Roman saga, there's plenty more drama, intrigue, and scandal to explore. So hold onto your laurel wreaths, because the tale of Rome isn't over yet. In fact, it's just getting started. So, as Rome teetered on the brink, what about those other ancient empires that once strutted across the world stage like they owned the place? The truth is, decline was often less of a dramatic curtain fall and more of a slow fade to black, riddled with economic missteps, societal shifts, and the kind of political blunders that make modern-day gaffes look like child's play. Take the once mighty Persian Empire, for instance. By the time Alexander the Great came swaggering in, pockets full of ambition and hair full of curls, the Persians were already sitting on a shaky throne. Sure, they had a postal system that would make even FedEx envious, and a road network that was the ancient equivalent of the Autobahn. But all that infrastructure couldn't save them from a leadership crisis. The Achaemenid kings, once the golden children of the ancient world, were bogged down by court intrigue and a treasury that leaked more than a sieve. By the time Alexander carved through their defenses, a feat that was less about his military genius and more about their crumbling unity, the Persians were ready to topple like a house of cards in a windstorm. And then there was the Maurya Empire in India. Founded by Chandragupta Maurya around 322 BCE, this empire stretched across the subcontinent like a well-spiced curry. Under his grandson Ashoka, it even hit the jackpot of ancient empires, a centralized government with a bureaucracy that could rival any modern office in its love for paperwork. But Ashoka's embrace of Buddhism, while spiritually enriching, led to economic stagnation. The funding of grand religious monuments and the cessation of military campaigns left the empire's coffers as dry as a desert summer. By 185 BCE, the Maurya Empire had fractured into a jigsaw puzzle of smaller states, each piece scrambling for power and resources. In China, the Han dynasty tells a similar tale. After more than 4 centuries of relative stability, they crumbled under the weight of corruption and peasant revolts. The failure to reform the land distribution system, which left peasants struggling to survive while aristocrats feasted, sparked uprisings like the Yellow Turban Rebellion in 184 CE. Imagine a grassroots movement with more grass than roots, an uprising that showed just how disconnected the Han were from their base. It was the beginning of the end, as internal strife and power struggles left the dynasty as vulnerable as a rabbit in a wolf pack. Now, let's debunk the myth of the noble savage, that romantic notion that indigenous societies lived in peaceful harmony with nature and each other, untouched by the corrupting influence of civilization. It's an appealing story, the kind that warms the heart like a campfire tale. But reality, as it often does, tells a more complex narrative. Consider the Maya civilization, which was anything but idyllic. They built magnificent cities like Tikal and Kapan, but their society was rife with warfare, human sacrifice, and an obsession with time that would make your calendar app look like a joke. Their eventual decline around the 9th century AD was a cocktail of environmental degradation, drought, and overpopulation, a familiar tune across the ages. And then there's the ancestral Pueblones, known for their impressive cliff dwellings in the American Southwest. For centuries, they thrived in a delicate dance with their environment. But around the late 13th century, they vanished, leaving behind cities like Mesa Verde as eerie time capsules. Climate change and resource depletion likely played a role, a stark reminder that even societies seemingly in tune with nature weren't immune to its harsh realities. So, have we really learned anything from these ancient tales of rise and fall? Well, yes and no. On one hand, we've seen patterns repeat themselves with the predictability of a sunrise. Economic mismanagement, social inequality, and environmental neglect remain as relevant today as they were millennia ago. Yet, on the other hand, each iteration offers lessons, however painful, that nudge us, albeit slowly, towards progress. The echoes of these ancient civilizations resonate in our modern world, a cacophony of cautionary tales and inspirational feats. In the end, the legacy of these empires isn't just in the ruins they left behind or the stories carved into stone. It's in the enduring human spirit, both flawed and magnificent, that continues to strive for greatness against the odds. From the ashes of decline rise new ideas, new societies, each learning and building on the last. So while the history of empires is a saga of triumphs and tragedies, it's also a testament to our capacity for resilience and reinvention. As we close this chapter on ancient history, let's carry forward the lessons learned and the questions we've unearthed. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that the dance between progress and folly is eternal. And while we may stumble, we always seem to find a way to get back up, dust ourselves off, and try once more to reach for the stars, or at the very least, a slightly better tomorrow. If you ever thought you've attended a party with an unexpected guest list, let me introduce you to the Bronze Age collapse, a historical shindig that was gate-crashed by none other than the infamous Sea Peoples. Imagine the ancient world, roughly 1200 BCE, where civilizations like the Egyptians, Mycenaeans, and Hittites were living their best lives, building pyramids, writing epic poetry, and basically showing off their Bronze Age bling. Then, out of nowhere, comes this rowdy bunch of maritime marauders, turning everything upside down like a bad episode of Ancient World. Unplugged. The Sea Peoples, a name as enigmatic as their origins, were the ultimate party crashers of the ancient world. To this day, historians are scratching their heads about who these people actually were. Were they displaced sailors, mercenaries with a side hustle, or just ancient nomads with serious wanderlust? What we do know is that they made a grand entrance into the historical narrative around the late 13th century BCE, leaving behind a trail of destruction akin to a toddler with a permanent marker in a freshly painted room. Now, let's talk about their impact. These nautical nomads didn't just disrupt the status quo, they obliterated it. The Egyptians, under Pharaoh Ramses III, had to pen some serious battle notes about their encounters with these seafaring warriors, describing them as a confederation of foreign invaders that needed to be stopped at all costs. Ramses III himself, in his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu, recorded his victorious battles against these invaders, boasting about how he made disappear the lands of the Sea Peoples. It's like the OG version of a pharaoh's humble brag. The Sea Peoples didn't just target the Egyptians, they spread their chaos across the eastern Mediterranean. The Hittites, whose empire stretched across modern-day Turkey, were hit hard. Their capital, Hattusa, was eventually abandoned, a city that once stood as a testament to their power and influence. The Mycenaeans, known for their grand palatial centers and ties to the legendary tales of Homer, also faced upheaval. Their palaces were burned, and the sophisticated Linear B script used for record-keeping vanished like a Snapchat story after 24 hours. So, what fueled this whirlwind of destruction? Theories abound, but let's dive into the economic and environmental factors that might have played a role. Imagine your favorite brunch spot suddenly running out of avocado toast. It's chaos, right? Well, the late Bronze Age was kind of like that, but on a grander scale. There were reports of widespread droughts, which led to failed harvests and food shortages. This environmental strain could have driven populations to migrate, including the Sea Peoples, in search of fertile lands and resources. Economically, the late Bronze Age was a time of complex trade networks. We're talking about a hyper-connected world where goods, ideas, and cultures exchanged like tweets on a trending hashtag. But these networks were fragile, and disruptions, like those caused by the Sea Peoples, could have toppled entire economies. The domino effect was real. Cities fell, trade routes were severed, and civilizations that once seemed invincible crumbled under the weight of these compounded crises. And what about the socio-political scene? Well, picture a world where the ruling elites were as stable as a reality TV marriage. Internal strife, coupled with the constant pressure of external threats, could have weakened these civilizations from within. The Sea Peoples might have been the straw that broke the chariot's wheel, but the cracks in the foundation were already showing. Despite their mysterious origins and destructive tendencies, the Sea Peoples are a fascinating puzzle piece in the complex tapestry of history. They remind us that the ancient world was not a static backdrop of timeless monuments and serene landscapes, but a dynamic, ever-changing stage of human drama. As we continue to sift through the sands of time, the Sea Peoples stand as a testament to the unpredictability and interconnectedness of human history. And who doesn't love a story with a few unsolved mysteries and a little bit of chaos thrown in for good measure? And just like that, we're moving from the enigmatic Sea Peoples to the heavyweight champs of the early Iron Age, the Assyrians. If you thought the Sea Peoples were a handful, wait until you hear about these folks. They were the ancient world's version of a powerlifter, strong, intimidating, and not afraid to show off their muscle. At their peak, around the 7th century BCE, the Assyrian Empire stretched its sinewy arms from the eastern Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf, and from the Taurus Mountains down to Egypt. We're talking about a dominion that rivaled even the most ambitious empires in history. Let's dive into what made the Assyrians tick. And spoiler alert, it wasn't just their intimidating military tactics, although those were definitely a big part of their story. Now, these guys didn't just sharpen their swords and call it a day. Nope, they were the military innovators of their time, pioneering strategies and technologies that would leave other armies in the dust. Take the battering ram, for instance. The Assyrians turned this into an art form, crafting machines that were less medieval siege weapon and more destructive bulldozer. They were also among the first to use iron weapons extensively, which, in the Iron Age, was like rolling up to a joust in a tank while everyone else is still on horseback. But it wasn't all about brute force. The Assyrians had a knack for psychological warfare that would make even the savviest modern strategist take notes. Their reputation as ruthless conquerors spread faster than gossip in a high school cafeteria. Cities would sometimes surrender at the mere sight of the Assyrian army approaching, preferring to avoid the horror stories that followed in their wake. This wasn't just a parade of brutality, though. It was a calculated strategy to expand their empire with minimal actual fighting. After all, why waste resources on a drawn-out siege when you can win with a well-placed rumor and a show of force? So, what about their administrative prowess? Because, believe it or not, the Assyrians weren't just about conquering lands. They were also about keeping them. They developed a surprisingly sophisticated bureaucracy for their time, with a road system that connected the empire like ancient superhighways, allowing for rapid communication and troop movements. Think of it as the Assyrian version of a fiber-optic network, but with more horses and fewer cat videos. Governors were appointed to oversee conquered territories, ensuring they adhered to Assyrian laws and paid their taxes, because even back then, death and taxes were the only certainties in life. The empire was a bit like a well-oiled machine, with the king at the helm, micromanaging like a boss who never learned to delegate. But hey, it worked for a while. Yet, with great power comes even greater hubris. The Assyrians were like a rock band that got too big, too fast. Their empire was sprawling, but that also meant it was stretched thin. Resources were constantly being funneled into maintaining this vast territory, and like any good house of cards, one wrong move could bring everything crashing down. Sure enough, internal strife and external pressures started to chip away at their seemingly unbreakable empire. By the time the 7th century BCE rolled around, the Assyrians were starting to feel the heat. They faced rebellions from within, as regions tired of Assyrian domination began to rise up. The empire was a bit like a Jenga tower, with one too many pieces pulled out. It was only a matter of time before the whole thing toppled. The final blow came when a coalition of Babylonians, Medes, and others had a go at the Assyrians, and spoiler alert, they succeeded in 612 BCE with the fall of Nineveh, the beating heart of Assyria. So, what's the takeaway here? The Assyrians remind us that even the mightiest can fall, especially if they bite off more than they can chew. Their story is as much about innovation and administration as it is about overreach and hubris. It's a tale as old as time. Fly too high, and you might just catch the sun with your wings. And while their empire crumbled, their legacy lived on, influencing future empires that would rise and fall in their wake. The Assyrian saga is one of those historical dramas that keeps on giving, reminding us of the delicate balance between power and responsibility. So, as we continue our stroll through history, let's keep our eyes peeled for the lessons these ancient architects of empire left behind. Because, as it turns out, history doesn't just repeat itself, it also leaves a pretty detailed playbook. As the Assyrians left their mark on history like a rockstar exit from an epic concert, let's glide into the Mediterranean spotlight where a new kind of stage was set, the world of ancient Greece. Now, when someone says ancient Greece, your mind probably leaps to images of toga-clad philosophers debating the meaning of life under the shade of olive trees. And sure, that happened, but let's not forget the other side of the Greek coin, a political scene that was as cutthroat as an episode of Survivor. In the 5th century BCE, Greece was a patchwork of city-states, each as fiercely independent as a teenager with a new driver's license. Athens and Sparta might be the celebs of the polis world, but they were just two of over 1,000 city-states strutting their stuff across the landscape. These city-states, or polis if you want to impress at your next dinner party, were the product of geography as much as politics. With the rugged terrain of mountains and seas slicing up the land like an artisanal cheese board, centralized power was about as likely as Zeus taking a day off from his Olympian antics. Now, let's talk democracy. Athens is often hailed as the birthplace of this political marvel, but hold your applause for a moment. Athenian democracy was less of an all-inclusive club and more of an exclusive VIP lounge. To snag a seat at the democratic table, you had to be a free male citizen, which is a polite way of saying that women, slaves, and foreign residents, metakoi, were left waiting outside. In a city of about 300,000, only 30,000 to 40,000 were actual citizens with voting rights. That's around 10% calling the shots. Imagine hosting a party, but only letting in people named Steve. That's Athenian democracy for you. But those who did qualify weren't just sipping on ouzo while discussing Socratic philosophy. They were expected to participate in the assembly, or ecclesia. This was direct democracy in action, where citizens gathered at the Pnyx, a hill overlooking the city, to debate and vote on issues ranging from military campaigns to public festivals. And they did this at least 40 times a year. Today, most people won't even commit to a weekly book club. While Athens was busy laying the groundwork for political theory, Sparta was perfecting the art of being the ancient world's most formidable fighting force. If Athens was the brain, Sparta was the brawn. Unlike their Athenian counterparts, Spartans didn't dabble in democracy. They had a mixed government structure, with 2 kings, a council of elders, and an assembly, but let's not kid ourselves. Spartan society was all about the military. Male citizens were raised to be soldiers from the tender age of 7, undergoing the agoge, a rigorous training program designed to transform them into lean, mean fighting machines. The whole society functioned like a military camp, which sounds like a nightmare to anyone who's ever experienced a group fitness class. Sparta's economy was as Spartan as its lifestyle, pun intended. Unlike Athens, which thrived on trade and had silver mines that glittered like the ancient world's version of a lottery jackpot, Sparta relied on a class of serfs known as helots to work the land. These helots were the backbone of Spartan society, doing the agricultural heavy lifting so the Spartan men could focus on perfecting their war cries. The helots outnumbered the Spartans by a significant margin, possibly as much as 7 to 1, which meant that keeping them in check was a full-time job. Spartans even declared ritual war on the helots annually, just to remind them who was boss. Now, let's talk economy. Athens, with its bustling port of Piraeus, was the ancient equivalent of a Wall Street trader, always busy, always looking for the next big deal. Trade routes stretched from the Black Sea to Egypt, bringing in grain, timber, and luxury goods. Athenian coinage, marked with the owl of Athene, became a standard currency in the Mediterranean, which is pretty impressive for a city-state that couldn't keep a tyrant off the throne for more than a generation or two. But the economic contrast between Athens and Sparta is just one thread in the complex tapestry of Greek city-states. Thebes, Corinth, Argos, each had its own quirks and ambitions, jostling for power in a world where alliances were as stable as a sandcastle at high tide. The Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta was the ultimate showdown, a decades-long conflict that saw Athens' naval prowess clash with Spartan infantry might. Spoiler alert. Sparta eventually came out on top, but not without heavy losses and a fractured Greek world in the aftermath. While we often romanticize these city-states as the cradle of Western civilization, it's crucial to remember the gritty reality beneath the marble facade. Political rivalries were fierce, economic disparities stark, and social structures rigid. Yet, despite, or perhaps because of, these tensions, the Greeks produced a legacy of philosophical thought, scientific inquiry, and artistic expression that continues to shape our world today. So, as we leave ancient Greece for now, let's appreciate the paradoxes of this civilization. A place where democracy was born in exclusivity, where the pursuit of knowledge coexisted with the thirst for power, and where the occasional Spartan just wanted a good fight. The Greeks remind us that history is not a linear narrative of progress, but a complex interplay of ideas, conflicts, and human ambition. And like any good drama, there's always more to the story. Stay tuned. As we part ways with the Greeks, let's hop across the Adriatic to the Roman Republic, a tale of ambition, innovation, and the occasional backstabbing that's juicier than a Netflix drama. So buckle up, because the Roman Republic is like the ancient world's version of a startup that went from a garage in Silicon Valley to a multinational conglomerate, only with more togas and fewer tech gadgets. Picture Rome in the 6th century BCE, a scrappy little city-state nestled by the Tiber River. At this point, it was a melting pot of cultures, thanks to its Etruscan rulers who were eventually shown the door to make way for a republic. And what a republic it was! Think of it as a political playground where power was the ultimate prize. The Senate, a council of patricians, was the brain trust, or perhaps more fittingly, the old boys' club. These were the aristocratic families who wielded real influence, like the Roman version of the Kardashians, but with more politics and less reality TV. Of course, no republic is complete without its checks and balances, or at least the Roman take on them. Enter the consuls, two annually elected officials who were basically co-presidents with a one-year lease on power. If one consul tried to pull a fast one, the other could veto it faster than you can say, et tu, brute. Democracy, Roman style, was about consensus and compromise, although sometimes it resembled a gladiator match more than a civil debate. But let's not paint too rosy a picture just yet. The Roman Republic was a living paradox, a system built on noble ideals, yet riddled with inequality. The plebeians, Rome's common folk, were the underdogs in this tale. They were the backbone of the military and the workforce, yet had about as much political clout as a rubber duck in a tsunami. It took the plebeian secession in the early 5th century BCE, a sort of ancient labor strike, to start getting their voices heard, leading to the creation of the tribunes of the plebs. These tribunes had the power to veto actions by the Senate, which was as revolutionary as giving a bullhorn to the quiet kid in class. The economy of the Roman Republic was a beast of its own. It was largely agrarian, with small farmers at its heart. However, as Rome's influence spread, so did its appetite for conquest and expansion. War was a lucrative business model, and the spoils of victory often led to the acquisition of land, slaves, and wealth. By the 3rd century BCE, Rome was strutting its stuff on the global stage, knocking out rivals like Carthage in the Punic Wars. Hannibal might have thought he was clever bringing elephants over the Alps, but Rome had the last laugh. Carthage was destroyed in 146 BCE, and its territory became Roman property faster than you can say, Veni, Vidi, Vici. But here's the kicker. The very success that made Rome the ancient world's superpower was also its Achilles heel. As the Republic expanded, so did the gap between rich and poor. Wealthy landowners snapped up small farms, creating vast estates called latifundia, worked by slaves captured in Rome's conquests. Meanwhile, small farmers, the backbone of the Republic's citizen army, found themselves out of work and out of luck. This economic disparity was a ticking time bomb, and it didn't take a soothsayer to predict trouble. Enter the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, the original political reformers with a flair for drama. In the 2nd century BCE, they attempted to tackle the land crisis with reforms aimed at redistributing land to the poor. Think of them as the Bernie Sanders of their day, only with more togas and a less forgiving electorate. Their efforts, while noble, ended in tragedy. Tiberius was clubbed to death in 133 BCE, and Gaius met a similar fate a decade later. Their deaths highlighted the Republic's growing penchant for political violence, a trend that would only escalate in the years to come. And speaking of escalating, let's talk about the military. Rome's legions were legendary, not just for their discipline and strategy, but for their tendency to march into history like they owned the place. Yet, as the Republic grew, so did its armies, and not always in a good way. By the late Republic, the legions were increasingly loyal to their generals rather than the Senate. Enter charismatic figures like Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who turned military command into political power plays. Marius, with his military reforms in the late 2nd century BCE, opened army ranks to the landless poor, effectively creating a professional army loyal to commanders rather than the state. Sulla, not one to be outdone, marched his army on Rome itself in 82 BCE, setting a precedent that would make political coups the new black. The Republic's political scene was as cutthroat as a Roman amphitheater. Enter Julius Caesar, the man whose name became synonymous with power. A military genius and master of propaganda, Caesar's conquests in Gaul made him a household name and a threat to the Senate's authority. In 49 BCE, with his iconic crossing of the Rubicon, Caesar declared war on the Senate. It was more than just a river crossing. It was a point of no return that marked the beginning of the end for the Republic. Caesar's eventual assassination in 44 BCE was less about restoring the Republic and more about a power vacuum that would lead to further chaos. His death wasn't the dawn of a brighter day for Rome, but rather the twilight of the Republic. The subsequent power struggles left the political landscape as stable as a teetering Jenga tower, with key players like Mark Antony and Octavian, later Augustus, vying for control. The Roman Republic is a tale of ambition, innovation, and the occasional dagger in the back. It's a reminder that even the most robust systems can crumble under their own weight when ideals clash with reality. The Republic was a complex dance of power, politics, and human ambition, a story as relevant today as it was over 2 millennia ago. As we leave the Republic on the brink of transformation, it's clear that Rome's story had only just begun. Stay tuned for the rise of an empire, because history is about to hit the turbo button. And just like that, we're revving up the time machine to witness the ultimate crash and burn moment in history, the fall of Rome. If the Roman Republic was a startup with grand ambitions, then the Roman Empire was the tech giant that overreached and forgot to read the terms and conditions. By the 5th century CE, the once mighty empire was teetering like a drunk gladiator after a night out in the Colosseum. Let's set the stage. The Roman Empire at its zenith, around 117 CE, was a sprawling behemoth, covering 5 million square kilometers and boasting a population of about 70 million. That's like having the entire population of modern France, Italy, and the UK under one roof, and we all know how well family reunions go. But by the time we hit the 3rd century, the cracks were showing, and not just in the aqueducts. Political instability was the name of the game. Emperors were popping up and getting knocked off faster than contestants on a reality TV show. The infamous Year of the 5 Emperors in 193 CE was a chaotic carousel of rulers that made the empire look like it was running on a never-ending supply of crazy. Meanwhile, the military was stretched thin, like butter over too much bread, dealing with invasions, rebellions, and the occasional barbarian with a chip on his shoulder. Economically, Rome was in the middle of a crisis that would make any CEO break out in a cold sweat. The empire's economy relied heavily on conquest and plunder, but with expansion grinding to a halt, it was like trying to run a car on fumes. Inflation soared, and currency debasement turned the denarius into a glorified wooden nickel. By the 4th century, the empire was split into eastern and western halves, a desperate attempt to manage the unwieldy beast, like a couple trying co-parenting after a messy divorce. Now, let's talk about the Huns. These folks were the rock stars of the migration period, sweeping across Europe like a whirlwind in the 4th and 5th centuries. Under the leadership of Attila, they became the boogeymen of Roman nightmares. Attila's nickname, the Scourge of God, wasn't just a catchy title. It was a PR campaign that left towns shivering at the mention of his name. In 451 CE, Attila's forces faced off against a Roman Gothic alliance at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains. It was a clash that rivaled any action-packed blockbuster, with both sides claiming victory and the rest of us left wondering who to root for. But the Huns were just one piece of the barbarian puzzle. The Visigoths, led by Alaric, were the first to sack Rome in 410 CE, a historical mic drop if there ever was one. They weren't the last, though. The Vandals followed suit in 455 CE, and then the Ostrogoths in 476 CE, which officially marked the end of the Western Roman Empire. Rome was like the celebrity whose party everyone wanted to crash. In the end, it wasn't a single blow that brought Rome down, but a series of unfortunate events that would make even Lemony Snicket wince. The fall of Rome is often painted as the beginning of the so-called Dark Ages, a time when civilization supposedly hit the pause button. But hold onto your candles, because this era was less about darkness and more about transition. Sure, the centralized power of Rome was gone, but the seeds of new societies were sprouting. The Byzantine Empire in the east was still going strong, like a sibling who took the family fortune and made it work. Meanwhile, in the west, the stage was set for the rise of the medieval kingdoms. The Franks, under the leadership of Clovis, were busy laying the groundwork for what would become modern France. The Anglo-Saxons were settling into what we now call England, and the Lombards were setting up shop in Italy. It was a time of movement and migration, like musical chairs with entire peoples instead of party guests. Let's debunk the myth of the Dark Ages as an era of complete ignorance and despair. While the Western Roman Empire's fall did lead to a decline in urban life and infrastructure, it was not the intellectual black hole it's often portrayed to be. The monasteries of Ireland, for example, became beacons of learning, preserving and copying classical texts like a medieval version of a cloud backup. The Islamic Golden Age was flourishing in the East, making strides in science, medicine, and philosophy that would later fuel the Renaissance. Economically, Europe was undergoing a transformation. The manorial system began to take shape, with lords and serfs working the land in a symbiotic dance that would define medieval agriculture. Trade routes, while disrupted, adapted and even expanded over time. The Silk Road continued to connect east and west, and the Viking Norsemen, those seafaring entrepreneurs, were exploring new territories, trading, and sometimes raiding their way into history. Socially and politically, the medieval period was a mixed bag. Feudalism emerged as the new power structure, with local lords holding sway over their territories like minickings in a sprawling chess game. Allegiances were complex and often shifting, with power struggles that would make Game of Thrones look like a friendly game of checkers. The Church, meanwhile, rose as a unifying force in the West, wielding influence that extended beyond the spiritual realm. The papacy became a political player, often clashing or colluding with secular rulers. Monastic orders spread across Europe, preaching, teaching, and sometimes brewing beer, a holy trinity of activities if there ever was one. In short, the so-called Dark Ages. were less about flickering candles in a dim room and more about the flickering lights of new ideas and cultures. It was a period of adaptation and resilience, where communities had to reinvent themselves in the wake of Rome's fall. The medieval era laid the groundwork for the Renaissance, that glorious reawakening of art, science, and exploration that would eventually light up the world like a fireworks display. So, as we wrap up this whirlwind journey through ancient history, let's take a moment to appreciate the legacy of these bygone ages. The fall of Rome wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning, a historical mic drop that paved the way for a new symphony of civilizations. The echoes of Rome's grandeur, Greece's wisdom, and the chaos of the early Middle Ages continue to resonate in our modern world. History, as it turns out, is a never-ending story of rise and fall, of innovation and adaptation. It's the greatest show on Earth, with a cast of billions and a plot that never ceases to surprise. So the next time you find yourself wondering about the past, remember that it's not just a tale of dusty ruins and forgotten empires. It's a living, breathing narrative that shapes our present and future, a reminder that even in the darkest times, humanity's creativity and resilience shine through. And there you have it, folks, a journey from the Bronze Age to the brink of the Middle Ages, with all the twists and turns of a blockbuster saga. As we close the book on this chapter of history, let's keep our curiosity alive and our minds open, because the story of humanity is far from over. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and remember, history isn't just about the past. It's about the stories we tell and the lessons we learn. Ancient Rome's military might was nothing short of legendary, but like any epic tale, it had its share of behind-the-scenes drama that would put a modern reality show to shame. At its peak, the Roman Empire commanded a staggering 250,000 soldiers, a force that could have easily trampled a small nation just by marching through it. But here's the kicker. Maintaining such a colossal army was like trying to support a champagne lifestyle on a beer budget. The costs were astronomical, and even Rome, with all its gold, silver, and the occasional plunder, had its financial limits. Now, don't be fooled by the glitzy image of Rome as an empire with endless resources. The truth is, behind those grandiose triumphal arches and marble statues, Rome was engaged in a constant juggling act of socio-political and economic improvisation that would make a modern accountant break into a cold sweat. When times got tough, and they often did, Rome had to pull out its own version of a military fallback plan. It was more of a delicate dance of diplomacy, strategic alliances, and yes, sometimes even a bit of good old-fashioned bribery. Let's talk numbers, because nothing brings out the reality of history quite like cold, hard data. The cost of maintaining a Roman legion, which could number anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 soldiers, was enormous. We're talking about feeding, clothing, and equipping these men, not to mention paying them enough to keep them from defecting to the nearest barbarian horde offering a better deal. And if you think today's military budgets are hefty, consider that by the 2nd century CE, the Roman military expenditure took up a whopping 1/3 of the empire's entire budget. That's a lot of denarii, folks. The socio-political gymnastics Rome engaged in to keep this military machine running were nothing short of acrobatic. When the treasury was running low, Roman emperors had to get creative. Debasing the currency was one popular trick, mixing in cheaper metals with silver coins to stretch the empire's wealth further. It was a bit like watering down your drinks at a party and hoping no one notices. Spoiler alert. People noticed. Inflation skyrocketed, confidence in the economy plummeted, and yet somehow the empire soldiered on. Of course, Rome wasn't just about brute force. It was about smart politics too. When the coffers ran dry, emperors often resorted to forging alliances with nearby tribes, essentially outsourcing their military problems. Why fight a costly war when you could just as easily make friends? Well, at least frenemies, with your neighbors. Offering land, titles, or the promise of Roman citizenship were all part of the negotiating table. It's the kind of political maneuvering that would make Machiavelli nod in approval. And let's not forget the occasional tax reform, because nothing says, we're in trouble, quite like squeezing your citizens for a bit more cash. The Roman solution: tax the landowners, and when that wasn't enough, tax the very air they breathed. Okay, maybe not the air, but close enough. The taxes on land and property were increased to such an extent that many landowners found themselves in a perpetual state of debt, a situation that only served to widen the gap between the wealthy elite and the struggling masses. But why did all this matter? Because Rome's ability to adapt to financial strain is what kept it alive for centuries beyond what many would have predicted. It wasn't just the strength of its legions that held the empire together. It was its capacity to innovate, to bend without breaking, and to keep both its enemies and its citizens guessing. Rome's fallback plan was less about retreat and more about strategic realignment, a testament to the empire's resilience in the face of adversity. As we delve deeper into the history of Rome, it's essential to strip away the romantic veneer that history often paints in broad strokes. The reality was a complex tapestry of human ingenuity, flawed decisions, and the relentless pursuit of power and survival. Rome was, and still is, a lesson in the art of adaptation, a reminder that sometimes the most significant battles are fought not on the battlefield, but in the corridors of power and the ledgers of accountants. Now, let's swap our gladiator sandals for some sandals of a more pharaonic flair and wade into the sands of ancient Egypt. Ah, Egypt, the land of pyramids, pharaohs with names that twist the tongue, and hieroglyphics that look like the world's most enigmatic emoji set. But beyond the allure of golden masks and mummified cats lies a society that, much like Rome, was a master of keeping up appearances while the reality was far more gritty. First, let's talk about those pyramids. We all know them as the iconic postcard image of Egypt, but they weren't constructed by armies of enslaved people as Hollywood might have us believe. The truth is a bit more nuanced and, dare I say, a touch more humane. Recent archaeological findings suggest that the workforce consisted largely of skilled labourers and farmers. Yes, the same folks who spent the rest of the year coaxing crops out of the Nile's fertile banks. During the inundation, when farming was impossible, these workers lent their hands to pyramid construction, and in return they were compensated with food, beer, and tax breaks. Turns out, even in 2500 BCE, folks appreciated a good benefits package. But don't let the perks fool you into thinking it was all sunshine and lotus flowers. Building a pyramid was no picnic. The Great Pyramid of Giza, the largest of them all, took an estimated 2-3 million stone blocks to complete. Each block weighed between 5 and 15 tons, which makes moving your couch up 3 flights of stairs seem like a lazy Sunday afternoon. And while the workers weren't slaves in chains, they were definitely bound by the economic realities of their time. When the pharaoh called, you answered, because the alternative was, well, not great. Now, let's pivot to the lifeline of Egypt, the Nile River. The Nile was Egypt's version of a cosmic ATM, dispensing life-giving silt and water to fuel the agricultural machine that fed the nation. But the river wasn't always the benevolent provider. Cue the ominous music. When the Nile decided not to flood, or worse, when it flooded too much, chaos ensued. Famine was never far from the Egyptian peasants' minds, and the government had to get creative to keep society from unraveling like a poorly wrapped mummy. During times of food scarcity, the state stepped in with rationing, much like a strict parent divvying out Halloween candy. Granaries, strategically placed throughout the kingdom, served as the ancient equivalent of food banks. Yet, unlike our modern-day systems, which often operate on altruism and donations, these granaries were part of a state-controlled safety net. The pharaoh ensured that when the Nile was feeling stingy, the people wouldn't revolt by doling out just enough grain to keep them from remembering how many stones were still left to stack on the pyramid. But Egypt's fallback strategies weren't just about grain. They had a knack for turning necessity into innovation. When the annual flood failed to deliver, the Egyptians turned to water management systems that would make any civil engineer nod in appreciation. They dug canals, built reservoirs, and developed shadoofs. an early form of irrigation technology that involved a counterbalanced pole to lift water. It's like they were one step away from inventing the modern crane, only with more mud and fewer hydraulic systems. Speaking of systems, let's not forget the economic backbone of Egypt, trade. The Egyptians were no strangers to the international marketplace, and they had a keen eye for opportunity. With resources like gold from the Nubian mines, papyrus and linen, Egypt was a bustling hub of commerce. They traded with neighboring civilizations, swapping goods like a master barterer at a flea market. This commerce was crucial during lean times, providing a buffer against the unpredictability of the Nile. But, and there's always a but, not everyone basked in the glow of Egypt's economic ingenuity. While the elite dined on delicacies and adorned themselves with jewelry that would make modern rappers envious, the average peasant was more likely to be found gnawing on bread that could double as a paperweight. The disparity between the rich and the rest was as wide as the Nile itself, and the records, often pennied by those in power, rarely tell the tale of the common folk's struggles. Like Rome, Egypt's grand narrative is a tapestry woven with threads of myth and reality. The pharaohs were not just rulers. They were living gods, or at least that's what their propaganda machine, scribes, would have you believe. This divine status was a double-edged sword, offering both the unquestioned authority to command labor for grand projects and the immense pressure to maintain the ancient Egyptian concept of truth, balance, and cosmic order. A pharaoh who couldn't keep the Nile in check was at risk of being seen as having fallen out of favor with the gods, which was a one-way ticket to getting the boot or worse. So, while the pyramids and tombs stand as monuments to Egypt's glory, they also serve as reminders of the human cost involved in building such wonders. The grandeur we admire today was underpinned by a society that had to constantly adapt to its environment and the whims of its rulers. It's a tale of resilience and resourcefulness, of a civilization that thrived not just because of what it built, but because of how it managed to keep building, even when the sands shifted beneath its feet. As we continue to unravel the layers of Egypt's history, remember that behind every mighty pharaoh and monumental structure was a network of ordinary people doing extraordinary things to keep the wheels turning. And in a world where the line between myth and reality is as blurred as a mirage on the desert horizon, it's these stories of adaptability and survival that offer the most profound insights into the human condition. Stay tuned, because next we'll explore how Egypt's cultural and religious beliefs intertwined with their economic strategies, creating a complex system that managed to hold together one of history's most fascinating civilizations. As the sands of Egypt's history settle, let's pivot from the land of pharaohs to the rocky outcrops of ancient Greece, where democracy was allegedly born, but more often it was just trying to stay out of financial trouble. Athens, our spotlight city, is often celebrated as the cradle of democracy, with its agora bustling with debates and citizens voting on everything from military campaigns to who should be ostracized next. But let's peel back the layers of myth and see how this democratic dream was funded, not by some noble pursuit of civic virtue, but by good old-fashioned silver. That's right, Athens' democracy had a secret weapon, the silver mines of Laurium. These mines were no small operation. They were the economic backbone keeping Athens' democracy from crumbling like feta cheese in a Greek salad. In the 5th century BCE, these mines produced over 20,000 drachmas a day. To put that in perspective, a skilled worker might earn just 1 drachma for a full day's labor. So it's not hard to see why silver was the lifeline for Athens' grand democratic experiment. Without these glittering treasures pulled from the earth, the Athenian navy wouldn't have had its triremes, and the city wouldn't have had the funds to pay its jurors or public officials. But let's not romanticize the mining industry. The mines were a grueling workplace, often staffed by slaves and the poor who toiled in dark, dangerous conditions. This was no platonic ideal. It was a brutal economic reality that underpinned the philosophical and political triumphs of Athens. While the wealthy citizens debated lofty ideals in the sunlit agora, Others sweated underground to keep the city afloat. It's a sobering thought that the birthplace of democracy relied so heavily on something so undemocratic. And then there were the wars. Oh, Athens loved a good campaign, especially against Persia. But war is expensive, and when you're funding a fleet of 200 triremes, each requiring 170 rowers who expected to be paid, not to mention armed, those silver mines were more than just nice to have. They were essential. It was a balancing act of epic proportions, with Athens constantly on the brink of financial collapse, staving it off with the spoils of war and the sweat of miners. Now let's sail across the Aegean to Sparta, Athens' perennial frenemy. If Athens was the philosopher king, Sparta was the warrior monk, living by a strict code that left little room for economic innovation. Sparta's economy was built on a foundation of helot labor, enslaved people who worked the land so the Spartan citizens could focus on military training. It was a system that worked, as long as the helots didn't revolt, which they tried to do more than once. It's hard to run a militaristic society when your economic base is teetering on the edge of rebellion. When it came to currency, Sparta was famously averse. Legend has it they used cumbersome iron bars instead of coins, making it difficult to amass wealth. This wasn't just Spartan frugality. It was a strategic choice to discourage greed and luxury, which they believed weakened the state. But here's the rub. When times got tough, and they often did, this lack of economic flexibility meant Sparta couldn't adjust its sails. While Athens could mint more coins or open another mine, Sparta had to rely on its military might, and the hope that its iron bars would hold weight in a world increasingly enamored with silver and gold. Despite these economic constraints, Sparta did have its moments of ingenuity. For instance, during the Peloponnesian War, they allied with Persia, of all people, to gain financial support against Athens. It was a move that would make even the most seasoned diplomats' heads spin, but it worked, at least temporarily. Yet, for all its military prowess, Sparta's rigid social and economic systems eventually left it vulnerable, unable to adapt to the changing tides of the Greek world. So, while Athens and Sparta were titans in their own right, their economic strategies reveal a fascinating contrast. Athens, with its reliance on silver and maritime trade, was more adaptable, but also more vulnerable to economic shocks. Sparta, on the other hand, was a fortress of stability in peacetime, but struggled to innovate in response to new challenges. Both cities remind us that even the most revered societies had their flaws and relied on less than ideal economic practices to maintain their status. As we continue this historical journey, remember that behind every iconic symbol of democracy or military, might was a complex web of economic realities. These ancient powerhouses were not just guided by their ideals or military strategies, but were steered by the hard truths of their economic foundations. Stay tuned, because next we'll delve deeper into how the cultural and philosophical currents of Greece intertwined with these economic strategies, shaping a world that still captivates us today. As we sail eastward, leaving the philosophical musings and military might of Greece behind, we find ourselves in the sprawling empire of ancient China, where dynasties rose and fell with a predictability that would make even the most stoic historian raise an eyebrow. Ah, China, a land where bureaucratic brilliance was as much a part of the landscape as the Great Wall, and where fallback plans during economic crises often bordered on the bureaucratically absurd. Let's first tackle the dynastic cycle, that rhythmic pattern of rise, flourish, decline, and collapse that defined Chinese history. It's like a historical soap opera, with enough intrigue, betrayal, and power grabs to fill several seasons. The Zhou, Qin, Han, Tang, and Song dynasties each had their time in the sun, but none of them could escape the inevitable sunset. Indeed, the Chinese themselves had a saying for it: "Heaven is high, and the emperor is far away," a nod to the fact that while emperors reigned, real power often rested in the hands of local officials. Now, when it comes to keeping the empire afloat during economic storms, the Chinese were nothing short of ingenious, and occasionally a bit ridiculous. Take the salt monopoly under the Tang dynasty, for instance. The government controlled salt production and sales, effectively making it the cocaine of its day. Everyone needed it, and only the state could supply it. This monopoly filled the imperial coffers, but also led to widespread smuggling. It's a classic case of the government trying to have its cake and eat it too, except the cake is made of salt, and smuggling it could get you in hot water. Speaking of water, the Grand Canal is another testament to China's knack for economic foresight. Stretching over 1,100 miles, it connected the fertile Yangtze River basin with the arid north. Built during the Sui dynasty and expanded by the Tang and Yuan, this marvel of engineering was like the Silk Road's soggier cousin, allowing for the transport of grain, troops, and ideas. It was the economic artery of the empire, ensuring that when northern China experienced drought or famine, the south could pick up the slack. But like any grand project, it required immense labor, often forced, and a staggering amount of resources, an estimated 5 million laborers worked on it during the Sui dynasty alone. The Silk Road, meanwhile, often gets the Hollywood treatment. Think camel caravans laden with exotic silks and spices, traversing dreamy desert landscapes. But let's not sugarcoat it. This trade route was as much about survival as it was about silk. For China, it was an economic lifeline that linked them to the booming markets of Persia, India, and even as far as Rome. Trade wasn't just a byproduct of the Silk Road. It was its raison d'etre. When the Tang dynasty opened its doors to foreign merchants, they weren't just being cosmopolitan. They were ensuring a steady flow of silver and gold into their economy, currency that was desperately needed to fund their massive bureaucracy and military. And that brings us to the bureaucratic machine itself, a marvel of organization that would make even the most seasoned pencil pusher nod in admiration. The Chinese civil service was a behemoth, with a hierarchy so complex it could rival the most intricate board game. It was fueled by the imperial examination system, a series of grueling tests that determined who got to climb the bureaucratic ladder. This system was a double-edged sword. It created a meritocracy of sorts, but it also led to a class of scholar officials who were more concerned with Confucian ideals than practical governance. A bit like hiring a philosopher to run your marketing department. Yet, for all its flaws, this system was remarkably resilient. When economic crises hit, the government could rely on its bureaucrats to implement policies swiftly, whether it was tax relief for drought-stricken farmers or the distribution of surplus grain from imperial granaries. It was a top-down approach that, while sometimes heavy-handed, kept the wheels of the empire turning. But let's not forget the human element in all this. Behind every grand policy or ambitious project were ordinary people, farmers, traders, soldiers, whose lives were a constant balancing act between survival and submission. The Song dynasty, for example, saw the rise of a commercial economy that would make modern-day economists drool. Urban centers like Kaifeng and Hangzhou became beehives of activity, with bustling markets, vibrant cultural exchanges, and a thriving middle class. Yet, for the average peasant, life was still a daily grind of taxes, labor, and the occasional rebellion when things got too oppressive. And speaking of oppression, the Great Wall deserves a mention. Often romanticized as a symbol of Chinese ingenuity and resolve, it's also a reminder of the lengths to which rulers would go to control their borders. Built over millennia by different dynasties, the wall was meant to keep out invaders, though it was often more psychological deterrence than impenetrable fortress. The reality, it's more accurate to say it kept the empire's enemies at bay while simultaneously keeping its people in check. The labor to build it was immense, often conscripted, and the human cost was staggering. It's a towering testament to both fear and ambition, two sides of the same imperial coin. So, as we navigate the rich tapestry of ancient China's history, it's clear that while the myths are grand, the realities are even more compelling. Behind the facade of imperial grandeur and cultural brilliance was a complex web of economic strategies, social structures, and political maneuvering that kept the empire going. It's a story of survival as much as it is of success, a lesson in the art of adaptation that echoes through the corridors of time. As we prepare to delve further into China's storied past, keep in mind the intricate dance between myth and reality that defines its history. Stay with us as we continue this journey, exploring how China's cultural and economic strategies intertwine to create a civilization that, despite its many challenges, managed to leave an indelible mark on the world stage. As we continue our journey through China's intricate history, it becomes clear that while the myths are grand, the realities are even more compelling. There's a certain magic in how ancient societies like China, Rome, Egypt, and Greece managed to keep their empires not just afloat, but thriving against the odds. Let's take a moment to draw some connections and reflect on these ancient fallback strategies that echo universal themes of survival and adaptation. First, let's talk adaptability, the secret sauce that has kept civilizations from fading into the footnotes of history. Whether it was Rome debasing its currency or Egypt's clever use of the Nile's capricious flooding, these societies understood that survival often required a nimble approach. Rome's ability to pivot with economic improvisation, like currency debasement, was less about pulling wool over the eyes and more about buying time. In the context of today's financial markets, it's akin to central banks adjusting interest rates to keep economies chugging along. The Romans might not have had spreadsheets, but they sure knew how to manipulate a financial ledger. On the other side of the Mediterranean, Egypt's astute use of its natural resources, most notably the Nile, illustrates another universal theme: making the most of what you've got. The river's flooding was unpredictable, but it was the backbone of Egyptian agriculture. By developing complex irrigation systems, the Egyptians turned potential disaster into a source of sustenance. It's a lesson in maximizing resources, one that resonates with modern efforts to harness renewable energy or manage water resources in drought-prone areas. Then there's the theme of innovation born out of necessity, a recurring motif in the annals of history. When Athens needed to fund its democratic experiment, it turned to the silver mines of Laurium. A modern parallel could be seen in how countries today are leaning into technological innovation to drive economic growth. Sure, the setting has changed from dusty mines to data centers, but the principle remains the same: leverage what you have to secure the future. Meanwhile, Sparta's rigid social structure, propped up by a helot-based economy, offers a cautionary tale of how inflexibility can spell doom. Their iron bar currency, while a bold statement against luxury, left them in the lurch when economic winds shifted. It's a stark reminder that without adaptability, even the mightiest swords can dull. In today's world, this might translate to the dangers of over-reliance on a single industry or resource, a lesson some all-dependent economies are learning the hard way. The great Chinese dynasties, with their cyclical rise and fall, underscore the importance of governance and the delicate balance between central and local powers. Their bureaucracy was a marvel of its time, enabling the coordination of vast resources. But it also shows the risks of over-centralization and the power struggles that can ensue. In the modern era, this reflects the challenges faced by large corporations and governments in maintaining efficiency while avoiding bureaucratic bloat. Now, what can modern societies learn from these historical improvisations? For starters, flexibility and resourcefulness are timeless virtues. In an era of rapid technological change and unpredictable global challenges, the ability to adapt is as critical as ever. Whether it's through economic policy, environmental management, or social innovation, the past teaches us that those who can pivot effectively often lead the charge. But it's not all rosy lessons from the past. There's also a need to avoid the pitfalls that ensnared our predecessors. Over-reliance on a single resource, the neglect of societal welfare, and the failure to innovate can lead to stagnation and decline. It's a balancing act that requires foresight and a willingness to challenge the status quo. As we wrap up this historical journey, it's worth pondering how history's lessons are often recycled in today's world, sometimes with equally mixed results. Take, for example, the resurgence of nationalism in various parts of the globe, reminiscent of the insular policies of ancient states. or the perennial struggle between economic growth and environmental sustainability, a tug-of-war as old as civilization itself. And so, as we close the book on our exploration of ancient economic strategies, we're left with a rich tapestry of lessons that continue to resonate. History, with all its grandeur and grit, offers a mirror to our present, a reminder that while technology may change, the dance of survival and adaptation remains timeless. If there's one takeaway, it's that the past is not just a distant echo, but a living guide, steering us through the complexities of the modern world. And as we navigate these uncharted waters, let's keep an eye on history's rearview mirror, offering us both cautionary tales and inspiring blueprints for the road ahead. Around 10,000 BCE, a group of humans looked at their spears and said, "You know, chasing that mammoth yesterday was a bit much, wasn't it?" This casual observation sparked one of the most radical shifts in human history, the birth of agriculture. Before this, humans had been perfecting the art of the nomadic lifestyle for thousands of years, wandering the earth like over-caffeinated tourists with no GPS. They hunted, gathered, and generally avoided commitment. But then, like every good Netflix series, things took a dramatic turn. The Fertile Crescent, as we now call it, stretching from modern-day Egypt through Iraq and Iran, was the original hotspot for this agricultural revolution. It turns out people in this region had a eureka moment. If you plant seeds, they grow into food. Mind-blowing, right? The first crops they planted were barley and wheat, which were the ancient equivalents of ramen and popcorn. Cheap, filling, and surprisingly versatile. This leap from hunter-gathering to farming didn't just happen overnight, though. It was more of a slow-burn rom-com where humanity gradually fell in love with the idea of staying put. With farming, life got a little less like an episode of Survivor and more like The Office. Lots of routine, but with the occasional wild subplot. This sedentary lifestyle led to the first permanent settlements. Jericho in the West Bank is often cited as one of the earliest, dating back to around 9,000 BCE. Imagine the excitement of having a place to call home, complete with a neighborhood watch and the world's first HOA complaints about noisy neighbors. But with homes came the notion of property and ownership, sparking human society's earliest economic systems. Bartering began, and suddenly, having surplus grain was like owning Bitcoin in 2010. Everybody wanted a piece. Now, let's talk about the ancient version of a tech startup, the invention of the wheel. First used around 3,500 BCE in Mesopotamia, the wheel was the ultimate game-changer. Before the wheel, moving heavy stuff was a logistical nightmare. Imagine trying to transport a pile of grain without a cart. It was like trying to move house with only a backpack. The wheel turned back-breaking labor into a manageable task, allowing for trade networks to flourish. Mesopotamians soon became the Amazon Prime of their day, rolling goods across vast distances with ease. But wait, there's more. While the wheel was rolling into town, writing was making a grand entrance. Around the same time, the Sumerians, who were living it up in Mesopotamia, decided it was high time to keep records. Enter cuneiform, the earliest form of writing, etched onto clay tablets. Originally, this wasn't about crafting epic tales or love letters. Nope, it was all about inventory management, tracking grains, livestock, and presumably the latest gossip. It's like the first Excel spreadsheet, only much cooler because it involved clay and styluses instead of spreadsheets and late-night emails. These innovations set the stage for Mesopotamia to become the Silicon Valley of its time. Like modern tech hubs, it was bustling with creativity, innovation, and yes, a few questionable startups. And while this region was pioneering agriculture, wheels, and writing, other parts of the world were catching on. Egypt, for example, was not about to let Mesopotamia have all the fun. They, too, started to farm around 5,500 BCE, but with the Nile River's help, they took irrigation to a whole new level. This wasn't just about making sure crops didn't die. It was about understanding and manipulating the environment on a grand scale. So, why does any of this matter? Well, the shift from hunting and gathering to farming was more than a change in diet. It was a transformation of human society. It led to the rise of cities, the creation of governments, and eventually the development of civilizations. It laid the groundwork for social hierarchies, economic systems, and even warfare. It was like the world's longest and most complex game of dominoes, where each piece set off a chain reaction influencing every aspect of human life. Next time you bite into a piece of bread or read a book, think back to those ancient innovators in Mesopotamia and the Fertile Crescent. They were the original disruptors, turning the world on its head with agriculture, wheels, and writing. They might not have had smartphones or social media, but they sure knew a thing or two about changing the world. As we bid farewell to the Mesopotamian innovators, let's board our metaphorical time machine and cruise down the Nile to ancient Egypt, where they were busy building not just an empire, but a legacy that would baffle architects and archaeologists for millennia. Enter the pyramids, those iconic, triangular giants that have been as much a part of conspiracy theories as they have historical studies. Built primarily during Egypt's Old Kingdom period, around 2600 BCE, these structures were the ancient world's skyscrapers, reaching for the heavens long before steel and glass came into play. Now there's a romantic notion that these pyramids were constructed by armies of slaves, toiling under the harsh Egyptian sun, whipped by merciless overseers. While that certainly makes for dramatic visuals and epic movie scenes, the truth is a tad more nuanced. Recent findings suggest that the pyramids were built by skilled laborers. Yes, actual paid workers, who lived in nearby temporary cities. Think of it as the world's first construction site trailer park. These workers were not only compensated for their efforts, but were also provided with medical care, food, and beer, a staple of the Egyptian diet. Talk about a benefits package. The construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza, the most famous of them all, was an engineering feat that still baffles experts today. Built for Pharaoh Khufu, it originally stood at 146, 6 meters tall, made from approximately 2-3 million blocks of stone, each weighing between 5 and 15 tons. That's like stacking millions of SUVs on top of each other without the help of a crane. Its construction remains one of humanity's greatest mysteries, with theories ranging from complex ramps to alien intervention. Spoiler, it wasn't aliens. But why go through all this trouble? The pyramids weren't just tombs. They were massive, stone-clad resumes. They symbolized the pharaoh's power, religious devotion, and their belief in the afterlife. To the ancient Egyptians, death was more of a dress rehearsal for eternity, and the pyramids were their ticket to immortality. It's like building your own personal space station to ensure a comfy afterlife. Meanwhile, over in Mesopotamia, the Babylonians were busy laying down the law, literally. Enter the Code of Hammurabi, one of the earliest and most complete written legal codes, dating back to around 1754 BCE. Inscribed on a 7-foot-tall stone stele, this code was the original terms and conditions, outlining regulations that governed everything from trade to family life. It's the ancient version of scrolling down and clicking, "I agree," without reading a word. The Code of Hammurabi is often hailed as a beacon of justice and order, but let's not get too carried away with the romanticism. While it established the principle of an eye for an eye, which sounds satisfyingly fair in practice, it was more like an eye for an eye unless you're of a different social class. The code was heavily biased towards the wealthy and powerful, reinforcing social hierarchies rather than promoting equality. It's the ancient precursor to justice for some, where money and status often dictated the outcome. Despite its inequalities, Hammurabi's code represents a monumental step in human civilization, the move towards a society governed by laws rather than the whims of rulers. It laid the groundwork for modern legal systems, showing us that while the law is not always perfect, it's better than the chaos of arbitrary rule. But let's not forget, this was also the era where you could be sentenced to death for loitering. Hammurabi was not messing around. Back in Egypt, the economy was booming like the first dot-com bubble. The Nile was the lifeblood of this empire, providing water, transportation, and fertile soil for agriculture. It was an economic powerhouse, supporting a population that grew to over 1 million by the time of the New Kingdom. This economic stability allowed Egypt to build massive monuments and temples, not just pyramids. The Egyptians had mastered the art of monumental architecture, and they weren't shy about flaunting it. Of course, all this grandeur came at a cost. The labor force was vast, with thousands of workers required to build the temples and monuments that dotted the landscape. While these workers were compensated, they worked in grueling conditions, with little room for error. It was a world where precision was paramount, and the cost of a mistake could be fatal, not just for the worker, but for the entire project. It's like building a house of cards, with the threat of a hurricane looming. As we marvel at the achievements of these ancient empires, it's important to remember that they were built on the backs of countless individuals whose names have been lost to history. The pharaohs and kings may have been the stars of the show, but it was the everyday laborers, craftsmen, and scribes who made it all possible. They were the unsung heroes of their time, the ones who turned grand visions into reality. So, as we wrap up this leg of our journey through the Age of Empires, let's take a moment to appreciate the complexity of these ancient societies. They were a mix of innovation and oppression, grandeur and grit. The pyramids and the Code of Hammurabi stand as testaments to human ingenuity and ambition, but they also remind us of the cost of greatness. As we continue to explore the past, let's keep in mind that history is not just a collection of names and dates. It's a story of people, real, flawed, and fascinating people, who shaped the world in ways that still resonate today. And with that, we leave the Nile and the Euphrates behind, poised to delve deeper into the twists and turns of ancient history. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the threads of time, moving ever closer to the grand tapestry of human civilization. And so, with the dust of Egyptian pyramids still clinging to our sandals, we fast forward to another cradle of civilization, ancient Greece. This was a land where innovation wasn't just a trend, it was a way of life. If Mesopotamia was the Silicon Valley of antiquity, Greece was its gritty, bohemian counterpart, where every street corner seemed to host a debate or a sweaty wrestling match. First on our itinerary is Athens, the original political laboratory where democracy was born, not with a triumphant fanfare, but more like a cacophonous jam session where everyone brought their own instrument and no one quite knew the tune. Around 508 BCE, under the direction of Cleisthenes, the Athenians decided to shake things up with a bold experiment in governance, giving power to the people. Well, some of the people. Only male citizens over the age of 18 could participate, which was a bit like saying everyone could play in the sandbox, except for women, slaves, and anyone under the arbitrary age limit. A baby step for democracy, but a giant leap from the despotism that prevailed. Athens, early democracy was more of a work in progress than the polished system we romanticize today. Picture a chaotic town hall meeting where everyone had a voice, but not necessarily something coherent to say. The ecclesia, or assembly, consisted of about 6,000 eligible citizens who voted on issues ranging from taxes to war. Decisions were often made by a show of hands, a method that relied heavily on the honor system and presumably a good pair of reading glasses for those in the back. But while Athens was busy inventing political science, let's not forget about Sparta, just a hop, skip, and a spear throw away. Whereas Athens was the think tank of the ancient world, Sparta was its gym. These folks were the original CrossFitters, minus the Instagram posts. Their entire society revolved around creating the perfect warrior, and they took fitness seriously. Like, really seriously. From the age of 7, Spartan boys were enrolled in the Agoge, a rigorous military training program that would make modern boot camps look like summer camp. It was less about personal bests and more about survival. Think of it as the ancient precursor to Survivor, only with fewer alliances and more hand-to-hand combat. Spartan women, too, were encouraged to stay fit, albeit for different reasons. A healthy woman meant healthy offspring, and healthy offspring meant more soldiers. It was a society that measured worth not in gold, but in grit. However, the romanticized view of Spartans as noble warriors overlooks a darker reality, a rigid social hierarchy that relied heavily on the labor of helots, or state-owned serfs. These helots were the backbone of Spartan society, handling everything from agriculture to domestic chores, allowing Spartan citizens to focus solely on military prowess. The helots' plight was less glamorous, often living under harsh conditions and facing severe repercussions for any sign of rebellion. Meanwhile, back in Athens, another revolution was taking root, not in politics or war, but in the mind. Enter philosophy, where a bunch of toga-clad thinkers took to the streets and schools to ponder life's greatest questions. It was like TED Talks, but with more beards and less PowerPoint. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, names etched into the annals of intellectual history, were busy laying the groundwork for Western philosophy. These guys were the rock stars of the ancient world, only instead of guitars, they wielded words. Socrates, perhaps the most enigmatic of the trio, never wrote a word himself. Instead, he roamed the agora, engaging citizens in dialogue that often left them scratching their heads or questioning their life choices. His method of inquiry, now known as the Socratic method, was less about providing answers and more about asking the right questions. It's like the ancient version of a therapist, but without the couch or the confidentiality agreement. Plato, Socrates' pupil, was the overachiever who decided to write everything down, creating works that are still dissected and debated today. His Republic is a treatise on justice and governance that remains a cornerstone of political theory. But let's not get too starry-eyed. Plato's ideal society was a bit of a philosopher's dictatorship, where the wisest, philosophers ruled over the rest. It's a vision that, while intellectually appealing, might have left the average Athenian a little wary of intellectual elitism. Then there was Aristotle, the pragmatist, who seemed to have an opinion on everything, from politics to poetry, ethics to zoology. If there was a subject to be studied, Aristotle was your guy. His writings, though vast, were less about abstract ideals and more about practical applications. He was the everyman philosopher, the type who'd probably have a podcast today, discussing everything from democracy to why cats always land on their feet. But for all their intellectual prowess, let's not forget that these philosophers were also products of their time. Athens, for all its grandeur, wasn't exactly a bastion of cleanliness. Public baths were a thing, but regular hygiene practices, as we know them today, were not exactly standard. Imagine debating the nature of existence while trying to ignore the aroma of a city without modern plumbing. It's a wonder any philosophical breakthroughs were made at all. This blend of brilliance and, body odor is what makes ancient Greece so compelling. It was a world of contradictions, where lofty ideals often clashed with harsh realities. The Greeks laid the foundations for democracy, philosophy, and sports, contributions that echo through time. Yet, they were also a society tangled in its own complexities, struggling with issues of inequality, power, and human rights. As we wrap up this leg of our journey through ancient Greece, let's appreciate the duality of their legacy. They were visionaries and traditionalists, scholars and warriors, dreamers and doers. Their stories remind us that history is not just a series of events, but a tapestry woven with human ambition, folly, and resilience. And as we prepare to explore the next chapter of our historical odyssey, let's keep in mind that every age has its own struggles and triumphs, its own myths and realities. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the threads of time, moving ever closer to the grand tapestry of human civilization. And so we sail from the philosophical shores of Greece to the colossal, bustling heart of an empire that would redefine the Western world. Rome. If Greece was the brainstorm session for democracy and philosophy, Rome was the workshop where they welded those ideas into an empire with a serious appetite for governance, grandeur, and gladiators. First things first, let's talk about Roman roads. These weren't just dusty pathways. They were the ancient equivalent of an interstate highway system, and they came with a side of imperial ambition. By the end of the Roman Empire, around 300,000 kilometers, That's over 186,000 miles for those keeping track of roads crisscrossed Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. That's enough to wrap around the Earth more than 4 times. And these roads weren't just for show. They were meticulously engineered, complete with layers of sand, gravel, and stone, topped with tight-fitting paving stones. Imagine the world's most durable Lego set. These roads weren't just about moving armies and merchants. They were Rome's arteries, pumping the lifeblood of commerce and culture across continents. They enabled trade, communication, and the swift deployment of legions, which was kind of the Roman version of sending a strongly worded email, only with more swords. The saying, "all roads lead to Rome," wasn't just catchy. It was a logistical marvel that underscored the empire's reach and efficiency. But let's not get too misty-eyed here. These roads also facilitated the swift movement of enslaved people, forcibly transporting to serve the Roman elite. It's a stark reminder that the same infrastructure that fueled progress also underpinned oppression. Speaking of oppression, let's dive into the gritty world of gladiatorial games. Picture this. You're in the Colosseum, a huge stone behemoth capable of seating around 50,000 spectators. It's a sweltering afternoon in Rome, and the air is thick with anticipation and the aroma of sweat and roasted meat from nearby vendors. Gladiators, often slaves or prisoners of war, were thrust into the arena not for glory but survival. The romanticized notion of heroic combat is tempting, but reality was far bleaker. These were brutal spectacles where life was cheap and death was a form of entertainment. The economics of these games were staggering. Organizing a single day of games could cost the equivalent of millions of dollars in today's money, often bankrolled by politicians seeking popularity or emperors flaunting their wealth. These events were less about sport and more about power dynamics, a public relations campaign with a body count. The Colosseum itself was a testament to Rome's architectural prowess, yet it also symbolized the empire's insatiable appetite for control and spectacle. It wasn't just a venue. It was a tool of political propaganda, a way to keep the masses entertained and distracted from the empire's less savory dealings. Bread and circuses, as the saying goes. Roman architecture wasn't all blood and bricks, though. It was also about innovation and influence. The Romans didn't invent the arch, but they perfected it, leading to the construction of aqueducts that brought fresh water into cities from miles away. These aqueducts were engineering masterpieces, with some, like the Aqua Claudia, stretching over 69 kilometers. They functioned with a precision that would make a Swiss watch blush. And while they were a public health boon, providing clean water to urban centers, they also highlighted the staggering inequality of Roman society. The wealthy enjoyed private baths and fountains, while the poor fetched water from public basins. The Roman legacy in governance is equally profound. Their republic, which lasted from 509 BCE to 27 BCE, was a complex system of checks and balances that inspired modern democratic principles. But let's not kid ourselves. It was a republic where power was concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy patricians, and the concept of representation was, let's say, selective. It was a system that worked well enough until it didn't, eventually giving way to the imperial system under Augustus, the first Roman emperor. Augustus, ever the savvy politician, understood the power of image. He retained the trappings of the republic while holding supreme power, a masterstroke of political theater that kept the Senate happy and the populace pacified. His reign marked the beginning of the Pax Romana, a period of relative peace and stability that lasted about 200 years. But let's not forget that this peace was built on the back of military might and territorial expansion. It was Rome's way of saying, "We come in peace, unless you resist." Now, while we're on the topic of expansion, it's crucial to acknowledge that Rome's empire was built on conquest and slavery. By some estimates, up to a third of the population in Rome itself were enslaved individuals. These weren't just laborers. They were artisans, teachers, and doctors, often more educated than their masters. The romantic notion of an empire built on discipline and order is undercut by this harsh reality. Rome's grandeur was supported by a system of exploitation and inequality. But here's the kicker. For all its might, Rome wasn't invincible. The same roads that brought goods and ideas also spread unrest and rebellion. Provinces chafed under Roman rule, and eventually, internal decay and external pressures led to the empire's fragmentation. The fall of Rome is a tale for another time, but it serves as a poignant reminder that even the mightiest empires are vulnerable to the sands of time. As we gaze back on Rome's legacy, it's a tapestry woven with threads of innovation and exploitation, grandeur and greed. The roads, the architecture, the games, they're all part of a complex narrative that continues to shape our world. So when you walk down a city street or watch a sporting event, remember the Romans, those ambitious architects of an empire who left us with lessons both inspiring and cautionary. And with that, we pause our journey through the annals of time, standing on the cusp of yet another transition. Ahead lies the twilight of the empire, the rise of new powers, and the enduring echoes of Rome's colossal footprint. Stay tuned as we unravel more of history's intricate tapestry, moving ever closer to understanding the full scope of our shared human story. As we stand at the edge of Rome's storied saga, let's talk about what happened when the empire that once seemed as enduring as the stars began to flicker out. The fall of Rome wasn't a single cataclysmic event, despite what the mythology suggests. Instead, it was more like an epic drama with a plot twist every few decades, involving a mix of economic woes, political scandals, and social upheavals that would make any soap opera blush. First up, the economy. Rome's financial system was about as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. By the 3rd century CE, the empire faced rampant inflation that would make even the most reckless of modern policymakers wince. The denarius, Rome's silver coin, was gradually devalued as emperors like Caracalla tried to fund their grandiose projects and military campaigns by reducing the silver content. It was like trying to pay off your credit card bills with monopoly money. Inevitably, things went south. The empire's reliance on slave labor didn't help either. It stifled innovation and kept the economy static, like trying to run a marathon with one leg tied to a post. Politically, Rome's leadership was a carousel of chaos. The infamous Year of the Five Emperors in 193 CE was emblematic of Rome's political instability. Imagine Game of Thrones, but with even less certainty and more assassination. Emperors were often military leaders who seized power through force, more interested in securing their personal legacy than in addressing the empire's long-term challenges. It was governance by the sword, a shaky foundation for any empire. Socially, Rome was a patchwork quilt of cultures stitched together by the thinnest of threads. The empire's vast reach meant it absorbed a myriad of peoples, each with their own customs and beliefs. This multicultural mix was both a strength and a weakness. While it enriched the empire culturally, it also fueled tensions. By the time the Visigoths sacked Rome in 410 CE, it was clear that the empire's social cohesion was fraying. This wasn't the first time Rome had faced invaders, but it was one of the most symbolic, signaling a shift in power dynamics that the old guard couldn't quite comprehend. Now, let's tackle the myth of Rome's sudden collapse. The fall of Rome is often portrayed as an overnight disaster, like a historical mic drop. In reality, it was more of a slow burn. Even after the traditional date of 476 CE, when the last Roman emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed, the Eastern Roman Empire, better known as the Byzantine Empire, continued to thrive for nearly another 1,000 years. The idea of Rome's sudden fall is a romantic narrative that simplifies a complex reality. It's like saying the Rolling Stones broke up after their first hit, utterly misleading. So, what can modern civilization learn from Rome's descent into chaos? Well, quite a bit. For starters, Rome's economic struggles remind us of the dangers of fiscal mismanagement and over-reliance on unstable foundations. A lesson for any nation that thinks it can print its way out of trouble. Politically, Rome's revolving door of emperors underscores the importance of stable governance. Leadership, that's more concerned with the welfare of the state than personal power. In an era where political polarization is rampant, this historical caution is as relevant as ever. Socially, Rome's story is a testament to the challenges of managing a diverse population. Integration and respect for cultural differences are crucial for societal harmony. The Roman Empire's inability to balance these tensions contributed to its downfall, a lesson worth heeding in our globalized world. And let's not forget the role of infrastructure. Rome's roads and aqueducts were marvels of engineering, yet they also facilitated the very invasions that contributed to its decline. Infrastructure is a double-edged sword. It can be a nation's backbone or its Achilles heel, depending on how it's leveraged. In wrapping up our journey through the annals of ancient history, it's clear that the Roman Empire's legacy is both a beacon and a warning. Their innovations in architecture, governance, and culture laid the foundations for much of Western civilization. Yet, their mistakes serve as stark reminders of the fragility of even the mightiest empires. The lessons of Rome echo through time, resonating in our modern world, urging us to learn from the past as we shape the future. And so, we close the book on Rome with a mixed sense of awe and caution, knowing that history isn't just a record of what was, but a guide to what could be. Here's to the Romans, the original disruptors, whose rise and fall continue to inspire and caution us in equal measure. As we bid them farewell, let's carry their lessons forward, weaving them into the ever-evolving tapestry of human civilization. In the grand tapestry of human history, there exists a time when the world was just a rugged chaos of hunter-gatherers, all stumbling around trying to figure out how to turn rocks into something useful. Enter Mesopotamia, the original trendsetter of civilizations, where humans first decided to break up with their nomadic lifestyle and settle down. This land, nestled snugly between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, is often credited as the cradle of civilization. And let's be honest, if humanity were a reality show, Mesopotamia would be the pilot episode. The Sumerians were the folks who decided that living in one place and getting organized sounded like a pretty good idea. They were the first to start keeping receipts, literally, with the invention of writing around 3200 BCE. Before you start imagining Shakespearean prose, hold your quills. It was more like 2 sheep to Enki scribbled on clay tablets. The invention of cuneiform was less about poetry and more about practicality, accounting, contracts, and yes, making sure that nobody was trying to claim they didn't owe those 2 sheep. Now, while the Sumerians were busy putting pen to clay, they also stumbled upon another world changer, the wheel. Around 3500 BCE, someone had the brilliant idea to stick a round thing on an axle, kick-starting an innovation that would literally roll through history. The wheel wasn't just about transport, it revolutionized everything from pottery to warfare. Imagine a world without cars, trains, or those annoying shopping carts with the wonky wheel. The horror. But wait, there's more. Alongside writing and wheels, the Sumerians were also busy laying down the first codified laws. Code of Ur-Nammu, circa 2100 BCE, might not have the catchy name of Hammurabi's Code, but it was the grandity of legal systems. It was the Sumerians' way of saying, okay, folks, no more arguing over who ate whose goat. The laws were a mix of fines and retribution, with an emphasis on fairness, or at least as fair as things could get when the penalty for theft was often a hefty fine or worse. While Sumerians were setting the stage for civilization, it's worth noting they weren't exactly living in a utopia. The region was a hotbed of city-states like Uruk, Ur, and Lagash, each with its own ruler who likely had a flair for dramatic governance. These cities were constantly at each other's throats over land, water rights, and probably who had the better ziggurat. The rivalry was intense, but it pushed them to innovate in architecture, agriculture, and governance. Speaking of governance, the Sumerians were the ones who planted the seeds for the idea of kingship. Ensi, or rulers, weren't just any Joe SHMO with a crown. They were seen as intermediaries between the gods and the people. In a time when divine endorsement was the ultimate PR boost, having the gods on your side was like having the ultimate influencer shout-out. This divine connection was essential, especially when the gods could be as temperamental as your Wi-Fi during a storm. The Sumerians' pantheon was a lively bunch. Anu, the sky god, was the top dog, while Inanna, the goddess of love and war, proved that multitasking was in vogue even in ancient times. Their myths and legends were as wild as any soap opera, complete with divine drama, epic battles, and tales of creation that involved a lot of mud and some pretty ambitious gods. These stories weren't just entertainment. They were a way to explain the inexplicable and exert control over the unruly natural world. Now, let's talk infrastructure. The Sumerians didn't just sit around writing and inventing. They were busy turning the harsh Mesopotamian landscape into a thriving agricultural hub. They developed irrigation systems that rivaled any modern engineering marvel. Channels and ditches brought water from the rivers to the fields, transforming arid land into a bountiful breadbasket. This agricultural prowess not only fed their city-states, but also allowed them to trade with neighbors, spreading their influence far and wide. Despite all these achievements, life in ancient Mesopotamia wasn't all cuneiform and canals. The region was prone to floods, droughts, and the occasional invasion. It was a tough gig, but the Sumerians were nothing if not resilient. Their legacy is one of adaptability and innovation, a testament to the human spirit's ability to thrive against the odds. In the grand narrative of history, Mesopotamia is often romanticized as a golden age, a time when humans first began to build the world we know today. But behind the myths and legends lies a story of struggle, survival, and the relentless pursuit of progress. The Sumerians laid the foundations for much of what we take for granted: urban living, written law, and even the humble wheel. So next time you're stuck in traffic, just remember, it all started with a couple of clay tablets and some very determined ancient innovators. And speaking of ancient innovators, let's board our time-traveling vessel and glide over to ancient Egypt, where the pharaohs reigned supreme, and the Nile was more than just a river. Think of it as the Amazon prime of its day, delivering everything from grain to gossip with remarkable efficiency. But before we dive into the logistics of pyramid building, let's talk about the pharaohs and their penchant for bling that would make even modern-day influencers green with envy. The pharaohs were the original bling kings, draping themselves in gold and jewels to assert their godlike status. Tutankhamun's tomb alone was a veritable treasure chest, packed with over 5,000 items, including a solid gold coffin weighing about 4 kilograms. That's roughly the weight of a grand piano, just to keep things in perspective. But all that glitters wasn't just for the pharaohs, vanity. It was a political statement, a way to flaunt power and divine favor in a society where the gods were the ultimate authority. Speaking of divine authority, the pharaohs didn't just rule with bling, they ruled with bureaucracy. Egypt's administrative system was a feat of micromanagement that would make any modern-day CEO's head spin. The kingdom was divided into nomes, which were like provinces, each governed by a nomarch. These local rulers were responsible for everything from tax collection to maintaining law and order. And trust me, tax evasion wasn't a wise move. The Egyptians kept meticulous records, and the penalties for skimping on your dues could be severe. The economy was largely based on agriculture, with the Nile's predictable flooding ensuring bountiful harvests that filled the granaries and fueled the state machinery. Now, let's debunk a myth that stubbornly clings to the pyramids like glitter to a party dress. No, aliens did not build these colossal monuments. The pyramids were the result of human ingenuity, labor, and a touch of obsessive-compulsive planning. The Great Pyramid of Giza, constructed around 2580-2560 BCE, was the tallest man-made structure for over 3,800 years, towering at 146.6 meters. It took an estimated 20 years and involved a workforce that some scholars suggest could have been as large as 20,000 to 30,000 laborers. These weren't slaves, but rather a paid workforce, fed and housed in nearby villages. Think of it as the ancient world's largest construction project, complete with unionized workers who were compensated with bread, beer, and other essentials. The logistics behind the construction were mind-boggling. The limestone blocks, each weighing between 5 to 15 tons, were quarried locally and transporting using sledges and ramps. The labor force was divided into teams that would be the envy of any modern project manager. And while we're pouring cold water on fantasy, let's talk about those mysterious hidden chambers. They weren't secret treasure rooms, but rather structural support, ensuring the pyramid didn't collapse under its own weight. The Nile River, the lifeblood of Egypt, was both a blessing and a logistical dream. It was the main artery for transportation, making it possible to move goods, people, and information across vast distances. Picture it: a bustling waterway where boats laden with grain, stone, and papyrus zipped back and forth. The river's annual inundation deposited rich silt onto the farmlands, ensuring agricultural abundance. This natural rhythm dictated the agricultural calendar, and by extension, the entire economic and social structure of Egypt. No wonder the Nile was revered almost as a deity itself. Now let's chat about mummies, the ancient equivalent of Instagram filters. Mummification was more than just a way to preserve the dead. It was a status symbol and a spiritual necessity. The Egyptians believed in an afterlife where the body had to be intact for the soul to recognize it. The mummification process could take up to 70 days and involved removing the internal organs, which were then stored in canopic jars, and desiccating the body using natron, a naturally occurring salt. The whole shebang was wrapped up with amulets and placed in elaborately decorated sarcophagi, ready for the soul's journey to the afterlife. Of course, not everyone got the deluxe mummification package. The process was expensive, reserved for those who could afford it, while the common folk often had to settle for simpler burials. But in a society where the afterlife was even more significant than the present, everyone aspired to the eternal glamour of a well-preserved mummy. So, as we drift down the Nile, let's appreciate the intricate dance of power, religion, and economy that defined this ancient civilization. Egypt was a land where divine kingship and earthly practicality went hand in hand, where the splendor of the pharaohs was matched by the precision of their administration. It's a world where myths and reality often blur, leaving us with tales as enduring as the pyramids themselves. And with that, we prepare to explore more of what made Egypt tick in the next part of our journey. Spoiler: it involves some pretty epic naval battles and a queen whose charisma could launch 1,000 ships. Speaking of epic naval battles and charismatic queens, let's take a swift hop over the Mediterranean to ancient Greece, the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, and some pretty intense city-state rivalries. Now, when we say democracy, let's not get too carried away. Yes, Athens gets a gold star for inventing this nifty system in the 5th century BCE, but it was hardly inclusive. If you were a woman, a slave, or, heaven forbid, a non-Athenian, your voice was about as heard as a whisper in a stadium. Athenian democracy was more of a members-only club, with citizenship reserved for free men born to Athenian parents. This elite group, making up about 10–20% of the population, gathered in the assembly to make decisions. Their voting system was charmingly analog. Voters would drop a white stone for yes and a black stone for no. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but it was a start, and it made Athens the envy of its less democratic neighbors. While Athens was busy inventing political systems, it was also home to some serious brainpower. Enter Socrates, the man who gave annoying questions a good name. Socrates, born around 470 BCE, was the original contrarian, always challenging the status quo with his relentless "but why?" He wasn't out to win any popularity contests, and his methods earned him more enemies than allies. Shockingly, or perhaps inevitably, his constant questioning led to his trial and execution in 399 BCE for corrupting the youth and impiety. Talk about shooting the messenger. But let's not forget Sparta, Athens' perpetual frenemy. If Athens was the nerdy kid with a penchant for politics and philosophy, Sparta was the jock, all about discipline, strength, and the occasional military conquest. Spartan society was a well-oiled machine, focused on creating warriors from a young age. Boys were whisked away to the Agoge, a state-run military school where they learned the art of war and the fine balance of surviving on minimal rations. Spartan women, on the other hand, enjoyed more rights than their Athenian counterparts. They could own property and were encouraged to stay fit to bear strong offspring. Women had to be tough. With husbands perpetually off fighting, someone had to run the household. Athens and Sparta had a relationship as complicated as any soap opera plot, oscillating between reluctant allies and outright enemies. The Peloponnesian War, from 431 to 404 BCE, was the climax of their tension. This 27-year saga was less about glory and more about attrition, leaving both sides exhausted and economically drained. Sparta technically claimed victory, but the war left Greece weak and vulnerable, setting the stage for bigger fish like Macedonia to swoop in later. Now, let's take a breather from the doom and gloom of war to talk about something a bit more cheerful. The Olympics. Founded in 776 BCE in Olympia, these games were the ancient world's answer to our modern sports extravaganzas, minus the commercial breaks. Athletes competed for olive wreaths, prizes that were more symbolic than substantial. Imagine training for years only to win a headpiece fit for a Caesar salad. The Olympics were a massive deal, attracting competitors from across the Greek world. They were more than just sports. They were a religious festival honoring Zeus. Events ranged from running and wrestling to the pancration, a no-holds-barred combat sport that made modern MMA look tame. And yes, the athletes competed in the buff, because why not? It was a celebration of the human form, though probably a bit drafty. Despite the pageantry, the Olympics were also a microcosm of Greek society's contradictions. Women were barred from competing, except in the chariot races, where they could own the team. Talk about riding the sidelines. Additionally, while the games promoted unity, they didn't stop the city-states from bringing their rivalries to the arena. Cheating and bribery were not unheard of, because even in ancient times, some folks just couldn't resist bending the rules. So there you have it, a snapshot of ancient Greece, a land of contrasts and contradictions. Democracy was born here, but its founders wouldn't recognize today's inclusive practices. Philosophers like Socrates laid the groundwork for Western thought while rubbing everyone the wrong way. And city-states like Athens and Sparta showed that even allies can be bitter rivals. It's a place where myth often mixes with reality, leaving us with stories as enduring as a marathon. But don't lace up your sandals just yet. There's plenty more to explore in the fascinating, flawed world of the ancient Greeks. As the curtain falls on the chaotic brilliance of ancient Greece, we hotfoot it across the Mediterranean to the land of togas and triumphs. Rome. Now, if you think modern politics is a three-ring circus, the Roman Republic would have been the whole carnival, complete with gladiators and chariot races. The political antics of Rome make today's political arena look like a quaint neighborhood bake sale. Let's dive into the drama of the Roman Republic, where power was a game of chess played with daggers. The Roman political system, for lack of a better word, was a masterclass in complexity. It all kicked off in 509 BCE, when the Romans decided they'd had enough of kings and set up a republic. This involved a delightful mix of the Senate, the consuls, and a bunch of other officials whose names sound like they were invented by someone playing Scrabble with Latin tiles. The Senate, the real power behind the throne, was composed of aristocrats who seemed to enjoy nothing more than an endless debate. Picture a room full of Ciceros, each convinced of their own infallibility, and you'll get the gist. But don't be fooled by the toga-clad image of serene deliberation. Roman politics was a contact sport. Consuls, the top dogs of the Republic, served one-year terms, which meant they had about as much time to make a mark as a Snapchat story. This short tenure led to some hasty decision-making and plenty of backstabbing. And let's not forget the tribunes, who had the power to veto decisions in the name of the common folk. These tribunes were the original people's champions, or at least that's what they claimed while building their own power bases. Of course, no discussion of Roman politics would be complete without mentioning the Gracchi brothers. These two were the poster boys for political reform, or chaos, depending on which side of the Senate aisle you sat. Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, in the 2nd century BCE, tried to address the vast economic disparity by redistributing land to Rome's ever-growing underclass. Naturally, this ruffled the feathers of the land-owning elite, culminating in a series of violent clashes that left both brothers dead and the Republic teetering on the edge of chaos. Their attempts at reform were less a gentle nudge towards equality and more a full-blown shove that plunged Rome into decades of social unrest. Now, let's shift gears from politics to another kind of spectacle, the Colosseum. Constructed between 70–80 CE under the watchful eye of Emperor Vespasian, and completed by his son Titus, this architectural marvel was ancient Rome's version of a Netflix binge-watch, but with a lot more blood. The Colosseum could hold up to 80,000 spectators, all jostling for a good view of the carnage below. And carnage there was, in spades. Gladiators, often slaves or prisoners of war, fought to the death for the entertainment of the masses. It was brutal, it was bloody, and it was wildly popular. But here's the kicker. The Colosseum wasn't just about violence for the sake of violence. It was a clever piece of political theatre. By hosting games, emperors placated the public with bread and circuses, distracting them from political unrest and economic woes. It's like your favorite binge-worthy series, only with a lot more at stake than just who gets voted off the island. The games were free, sponsored by emperors or wealthy individuals seeking public approval. Imagine the political capital that could be gained by throwing the grandest games of the year, a surefire way to climb the social ladder, or at least avoid being trampled by it. And speaking of engineering marvels, let's take a moment to appreciate Roman roads. Built over centuries, they spanned 250,000 miles at their peak, a network so extensive it could give Google Maps a run for its money. Roman roads were the arteries of the empire, facilitating trade, military movements, and communication across vast distances. And while today we might curse potholes and traffic jams, Roman roads were the superhighways of their time, constructed with layers of sand, gravel, and stone that have withstood the test of time. Some are still in use today, a testament to Roman engineering prowess. These roads weren't just about getting from point A to point B quickly. They were a statement of power and control, a way to knit the sprawling empire together with a web of stone. They allowed Rome to project its military might far and wide, ensuring that legions could be dispatched at a moment's notice to quell uprisings or expand territories. And for the traders, they provided a reliable route for moving goods, bolstering the economy and enriching the empire. In essence, Roman roads were the backbone of an empire that believed in infrastructure with a capital I. In the grand scheme of history, Rome's legacy is a mix of architectural brilliance, political intrigue, and a penchant for grand spectacles. The Colosseum stood as a monument to the power of distraction, while the roads symbolized connectivity and control. The political machinations of the Senate and the consuls showed a republic constantly in flux, teetering between reform and chaos. It's a reminder that even in ancient times, the balance of power was a delicate dance, one that could tip into turmoil at any moment. As we leave the eternal city, remember this. Rome wasn't just a place of legends and myths. It was a living, breathing entity that shaped the world in ways that still resonate today. But don't go packing your laurel wreath just yet. There's more to uncover about how Rome transitioned from republic to empire, a transformation that would echo through the ages. Stick around as we unravel the threads of Roman history and explore the next chapter in this epic saga. As Rome transitioned from a republic to an empire, it seemed like they had everything figured out, until they didn't. You see, the empire was a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. Only someone went and accidentally vacuumed up a few critical pieces. By the 5th century CE, the empire that once boasted roads stretching 250,000 miles got caught in a traffic jam of its own making, leading to what we romantically call the fall of Rome. But let's be clear, Rome didn't just drop dead one day. It was more of a long, drawn-out collapse, like that awkward moment when you're trying to gracefully exit a social gathering but keep getting sidetracked by conversations you thought you were done with. Economically, the empire was as shaky as a Jenga tower in a windstorm. The Roman economy relied heavily on slave labor and military conquest, which was all fun and games until the neighbors stopped playing along. As Rome expanded, it stretched its resources thin, like butter over too much bread, to quote a certain hobbit. The cost of maintaining such a sprawling empire was astronomical. Military expenses alone were enough to make any emperor's toga hem curl, with legions stationed from Britannia to the borders of Persia. To make matters worse, the empire's reliance on conquering new lands for economic growth was like a pyramid scheme that eventually ran out of new members. When the empire stopped expanding, the cash flow dried up faster than you can say denarius. Meanwhile, socially speaking, the Romans were having a bit of an identity crisis. The once vibrant cities began to decay as people fled to the countryside, hoping to escape the tax man and invading barbarians alike. The urban centers that had been the beating heart of Roman innovation turned into ghost towns, with the infrastructure crumbling under neglect. It's hard to keep up with road repairs when you're busy fending off Visigoths, after all. By 410 CE, the Visigoths, led by Alaric, had sacked Rome itself, a symbolic blow that sent shockwaves through the empire. It was less of a fall and more of a very public faceplant. And let's not forget the internal political drama. By the time the Western Roman Empire was wheezing its last breath, it had gone through emperors like a teenager goes through fashion trends. In the 50 years leading up to 476 CE, Rome had about 26 emperors, many of whom met less than natural ends. Assassination became something of a spectator sport, as everyone from soldiers to senators jostled for a seat on the imperial throne. It's hard to govern effectively when you're constantly worried about your next knife in the back or front, depending on your enemy's creativity. Now, the Eastern Roman Empire, with its capital in Constantinople, fared a bit better. Some say it got the brains of the operation, while the West got the brawn. But even brains can't fight off every invader forever. The Byzantine Empire, as it came to be known, carried on the Roman legacy until 1453 CE, when the Ottomans finally took Constantinople. But by then, the world had changed in ways even the Romans couldn't have predicted, leaving the once mighty empire a shadow of its former self. As Rome's grip loosened, Europe stumbled into what we affectionately, or cynically, call the Dark Ages. Picture a time when the lights went out, but the party awkwardly continued anyway. Barbarian kingdoms sprang up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, each trying to establish some semblance of order amidst the chaos. The Western Roman Empire's infrastructure had been the glue holding everything together, and without it, Europe was a bit like a toddler trying to assemble a flat-pack wardrobe without the instructions. Economically, things weren't much brighter. The collapse of centralized Roman authority meant trade routes disintegrated, leaving local economies to fend for themselves. Barter became the order of the day, with the concept of currency taking a backseat. It's hard to trade in denarii when your neighbor only wants to swap goats. This economic contraction led to a reliance on subsistence farming, where people focused on growing just enough to survive rather than thriving. Socially, the Dark Ages were a time of great upheaval and, let's face it, a bit of a mess. The hierarchical structure of Roman society gave way to feudalism, a system that made nepotism look like a meritocracy. Lords and vassals formed a patchwork quilt of allegiances, each with their own rules and often their own axes to grind. Peasants worked the land in exchange for protection, a fancy way of saying they were stuck in a never-ending cycle of toil for scraps. But let's not romanticize the darkness too much. While the era was certainly lacking in light, both metaphorically and literally, it wasn't all doom and gloom. The church stepped in as a beacon of stability, providing education and preserving what knowledge it could from the Roman era. Monasteries became the repositories of learning, and intellectual life found a flickering flame in the midst of the chaos. It was a time when even the smallest flicker of light could illuminate a whole world. So did Rome really fall, or did it just go on an extended vacation? Well, the answer is a bit of both. The empire as a political entity collapsed, but its influence lingered like the scent of a particularly pungent cheese. Roman law, culture, and technology continued to shape the medieval world and beyond. The Latin language evolved into the Romance languages, and the Roman Catholic Church remained a dominant force in Europe. In many ways, Rome's legacy is like a particularly persistent houseguest, sometimes annoying, sometimes charming, and always leaving its mark long after it's gone. The fall of Rome teaches us that even the mightiest civilizations can stumble, but the echoes of their achievements can resonate for centuries. As we put down our history books and switch off our time machines, let's remember that the past is never truly past. It's a tangled web of stories that continue to shape our present, reminding us that human nature is as consistent as it is complex. So here's to Rome, the glorious, messy, magnificent mess that it was. May its lessons never be forgotten, even when things get a little dark.